Driven to Win presents The Red House Mystery by Milne. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can enjoy more amazing stories like this. Now let's begin the story. Chapter 12. A shadow on the wall. In the 20 hours or so at his disposal, Inspector Birch had been busy. He had telegraphed to London a complete description of Mark in the brown flannel suit which he had last been seen wearing. He had made inquiries at Stanton as to whether anybody answering to this description had been seen leaving by the 4.20, and though the evidence which had been volunteered to him had been inconclusive, it made it possible that Mark had indeed caught that train and had arrived in London before the police at the other end had been ready to receive him. But the fact that it was market day at Stanton, and that the little town would be more full than usual of visitors, made it less likely that either the departure of Mark by the 4.20 or the arrival of Robert by the 2.10 earlier in the afternoon would have been particularly noticed. As Antony had said to Cayley, there would always be somebody ready to hand the police a circumstantial story of the movements of any man in whom the police were interested. That Robert had come by the 2.10 seemed fairly certain. To find out more about him in time for the inquest would be difficult. All that was known about him in the village where he and Mark had lived as boys bore out the evidence of Cayley. He was an unsatisfactory son, and he had been hurried off to Australia, nor had he been seen since in the village. Whether there were any more substantial grounds of quarrel between the two brothers than that the younger one was at home and well-to-do, while the elder was poor and in exile, was not known, nor, as far as the inspector could see, was it likely to be known until Mark was captured. The discovery of Mark was all that mattered immediately. Dragging the pond might not help towards this, but it would certainly give the impression in court tomorrow that Inspector Birch was handling the case with zeal. And if only the revolver with which the deed was done was brought to the surface, his trouble would be well repaid. Inspector Birch produces the weapon would make an excellent headline in the local paper. He was feeling well satisfied with himself. Therefore, as he walked to the pond, where his men were waiting for him, and quite in the mood for a little pleasant talk with Mr. Gillingham and his friend, Mr. Beverley, he gave them a cheerful good afternoon, and added with a smile, "Coming to help us?" "You don't really want us," said Antony, smiling back at him. "You can come if you like." Antony gave a little shudder. "You can tell me afterwards what you find," he said. "By the way," he added, "I hope the landlord of the George gave me a good character." The inspector looked at him quickly. "Now how on earth do you know anything about that?" Antony bowed to him, gravely, "Because I guessed that you were a very efficient member of the force." The inspector laughed. "Well, you came out all right, Mr. Gillingham. You got a clean bill. But I had to make certain about you." "Of course you did." "Well, I wish you luck. But I don't think you'll find much of the pond. It's rather out of the way, isn't it, for anybody running away?" "That's just what I told Mr. Cayley when he called my attention to the pond. However, we shan't do any harm by looking. It's the unexpected that's the most likely in this sort of case." "You're quite right, Inspector. Well, we mustn't keep you. Good afternoon." And Antony smiled pleasantly at him. "Good afternoon, sir." "Good afternoon," said Bill. Antony stood looking after the inspector as he strode off, silent for so long that Bill shook him by the arm at last, and asked him rather crossly what was the matter. Antony shook his head slowly from side to side. "I don't know. Really, I don't know. It's too devilish what I keep thinking. He can't be as cold-blooded as that." "Who?" Without answering, Antony led the way back to the garden seat on which they had been sitting. He sat there with his head in his hands. "Oh, I hope they find something," he murmured. "Oh, I hope they do." "In the pond?" "Yes." "But what?" "Anything, Bill, anything." Bill was annoyed. "I say, Tony, this won't do. You really mustn't be so damn mysterious. What's happened to you suddenly?" Antony looked up at him in surprise. "Didn't you hear what he said?" "What, particularly?" "That it was Cayley's idea to drag the pond." Oh, I say." Bill was rather excited again. "You mean that he's hidden something there? Some false clue which he wants the police to find?" "I hope so," said Antony earnestly, "but I'm afraid—" He stopped short. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that he hasn't hidden anything there. Afraid that, well, what's the safest place in which to hide anything very important?" "Somewhere where nobody will look." "There's a better place than that." "What?" Somewhere where everybody has already looked. By Jove, you mean that as soon as the pond has been dragged, Cayley will hide something there? Yes, I'm afraid so. But why afraid? Because I think that it must be something very important, something which couldn't easily be hidden anywhere else. What? Asked Bill eagerly. Anthony shook his head. No, I'm not going to talk about it yet. We can wait and see what the inspector finds. He may find something, I don't know what, something that Cayley has put there for him to find. But if he doesn't, then it will be because Cayley is going to hide something there tonight. What? Asked Bill again. You will see what, Bill, said Anthony, because we shall be there. Are we going to watch him? Yes, if the inspector finds nothing. That's good, said Bill. If it were a question of Cayley or the law, he was quite decided as to which side he was taking. Previous to the tragedy of yesterday, he had got on well enough with both of the cousins, without being in the least intimate with either. Indeed, of the two he preferred, perhaps, the silent, solid Cayley to the more volatile Mark. Cayley's qualities, as they appeared to Bill, may have been chiefly negative, but even if this merit lay in the fact that he never exposed whatever weaknesses he may have had, this is an excellent quality in a fellow guest, or if you like fellow host, in a house where one is continually visiting. Mark's weaknesses, on the other hand, were very plain to the eye, and Bill had seen a good deal of them. Yet, though he had hesitated to define his position that morning in regard to Mark, he did not hesitate to place himself on the side of the law against Cayley. Mark, after all, had done him no harm, but Cayley had committed an unforgivable offense. Cayley had listened secretly to a private conversation between himself and Tony. Let Cayley hang, if the law demanded it. Anthony looked at his watch and stood up. Come along, he said. It's time for that job I spoke about. The passage, said Bill eagerly. No, the thing which I said that I had to do this afternoon. Oh, of course. What is it? Without saying anything, Anthony led the way indoors to the office. It was 3 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock yesterday Anthony and Cayley had found the body. At a few minutes after 3, he had been looking out of the window of the adjoining room, and had been surprised suddenly to find the door open and Cayley behind him. He had vaguely wondered at the time why he had expected the door to be shut, but he had had no time then to worry the thing out, and he had promised himself to look into it at his leisure afterwards. Possibly it meant nothing. Possibly, if it meant anything, he could have found out its meaning by a visit to the office that morning. But he had felt that he would be more likely to recapture the impressions of yesterday, if he chose as far as possible the same conditions for his experiment. So he had decided that 3 o'clock that afternoon should find him once more in the office. As he went into the room, followed by Bill, he felt it almost as a shock that there was now no body of Robert lying there between the two doors. But there was a dark stain which showed where the dead man's head had been, and Anthony knelt down over it, as he had knelt 24 hours before. I want to go through it again, he said. You must be Cayley. Cayley said he would get some water. I remember thinking that water wasn't much good to a dead man, and that probably he was only too glad to do anything rather than nothing. He came back with a wet sponge and a handkerchief. I suppose he got the handkerchief from the chest of drawers. Wait a bit. He got up and went into the adjoining room, looked round it, pulled open a drawer or two, and after shutting all the doors, came back to the office. The sponge is there, and there are handkerchiefs in the top. Right-hand drawer. Now then, Bill, just pretend you're Cayley. You just said something about water, and you get up. Feeling that it was all a little uncanny, Bill, who had been kneeling beside his friend, got up and walked out. Anthony, as he had done on the previous day, looked up after him as he went. Bill turned into the room on the right, opened the drawer and got the handkerchief, damped the sponge, and came back. Well, he said wonderingly. Anthony shook his head. It's all different, he said. For one thing, you made a devil of a noise, and Cayley didn't. Perhaps you weren't listening when Cayley went in. I wasn't, but I should have heard him if I could have heard him, and I should have remembered afterwards. Perhaps Cayley shut the door after him. Wait. He pressed his hand over his eyes and thought. It wasn't anything which he had heard, but something which he had seen. He tried desperately hard to see it again. He saw Cayley getting up, opening the door from the office, leaving it open and walking into the passage, turning to the door on the right, opening it, going in, And then what did his eyes see after that? If they would only tell him again. Suddenly he jumped up, his face alight. "Bill, I've got it," he cried. "What?" "The shadow on the wall." "I was looking at the shadow on the wall." "Oh, ass and 10 times ass." Bill looked uncomprehendingly at him. Anthony took his arm and pointed to the wall of the passage. "Look at the sunlight on it," he said. "That's because you've left the door of that room open. The sun comes straight in through the windows. Now, I'm going to shut the door. Look, did you see how the shadow moves across?" "That's what I saw. The shadow moving across as the door shut behind him." "Bill, go in and shut the door behind you, quite naturally. Quick!" Bill went out, and Anthony knelt, watching eagerly. "I thought so," he cried. "I knew it couldn't have been that." "What happened?" said Bill, coming back. "Just what you would expect. The sunlight came, and the shadow moved back again, all in one movement." "And what happened yesterday?" "The sunlight stayed there, and then the shadow came very slowly back, and there was no noise of the door being shut." Bill looked at him with startled eyes. "By Jove, you mean that Cayley closed the door afterwards as an afterthought, and very quietly, so that you couldn't hear?" Anthony nodded. "Yes. That explains why I was surprised afterwards when I went into the room to find the door open behind me. You know how those doors with springs on them close? The sort which old gentlemen have to keep out drafts? Yes. Just at first they hardly move at all, and then very, very slowly they swing to, well, that was the way the shadow moved, and subconsciously I must have associated it with the movement of that sort of door. By Jove!" He got up and dusted his knees. "Now, Bill, just to make sure, go in and close the door like that. As an afterthought, you know, and very quietly, so that I don't hear the click of it." Bill did as he was told, and then put his head out eagerly to hear what had happened. "That was it," said Anthony, with absolute conviction. "That was just what I saw yesterday." He came out of the office and joined Bill in the little room. "And now," he said, "let's try and find out what it was that Mr. Cayley was doing in here, and why he had to be so very careful that his friend Mr. Gillingham didn't overhear him." Chapter 13. The Open. Window Anthony's first thought was that Cayley had hidden something perhaps which he had found by the body, but that was absurd. In the time at his disposal, he could have done no more than put it away in a drawer, where it would be much more open to discovery by Anthony than if he had kept it in his pocket. In any case, he would have removed it by this time and hidden it in some more secret place. Besides, why in this case bother about shutting the door? Bill pulled open a drawer in the chest and looked inside. "Is it any good going through these, do you think?" he asked. Anthony looked over his shoulder. "Why do you keep clothes here at all?" he asked. "Did he ever change down here?" "My dear Tony, he had more clothes than anybody in the world. He just kept them here in case they might be useful, I expect. When you and I go from London to the country, we carry our clothes about with us. Mark never did. In his flat in London, he had everything all over again, which he has here. It was a hobby with him, collecting clothes. If he'd had half a dozen houses, they would all have been full of a complete gentleman's town and country outfit." "I see. Of course, it might be useful sometimes when he was busy in the next room, not to have to go upstairs for a handkerchief or a more comfortable coat." "I see. Yes." He was walking round the room as he answered, and he lifted the top of the linen basket which stood near the wash basin and glanced in. "He seems to have come in here for a collar lately." Bill peered in. There was one collar at the bottom of the basket. "Yes, I dare say he would," he agreed, "if he suddenly found that the one he was wearing was uncomfortable or a little bit dirty or something. He was very finicky." Anthony leaned over and picked it out. "It must have been uncomfortable this time," he said, after examining it carefully. "It couldn't very well be cleaner." He dropped it back again. "Anyway, he did come in here sometimes?" "Oh, yes, rather." "Yes, but what did Cayley come in for so secretly?" "What did he want to shut the door for?" said Bill. "That's what I don't understand. You couldn't have seen him, anyhow." "No, so it follows that I might have heard him. He was going to do something which he didn't want me to hear." "By Jove, that's it," said Bill eagerly. "Yes, but what?" Bill frowned hopefully to himself, but no inspiration came. "Well, let's have some air, anyway," he said at last, exhausted by the effort, and he went to the window, opened it, and looked out. Then, struck by an idea, he turned back to Antony and said, "Do you think I had better go up to the pond to make sure that they're still at it?" Because he broke off suddenly at the sight of Antony's face. "Oh, idiot, idiot!" Antony cried. "Oh, most super excellent of Watsons. Oh, you lamb, you blessing. Oh, Gillingham, you incomparable ass." "What on earth? The window, cried Antony, pointing to it. Bill turned back to the window, expecting it to say something. As it said nothing, he looked at Antony again. "He was opening the window," cried Antony. "Who? Cayley, of course." Very gravely and slowly he expounded. "He came in here in order to open the window. He shut the door so that I shouldn't hear him open the window. He opened the window. I came in here and found the window open. I said, 'This window is open.' My amazing powers of analysis tell me that the murderer must have escaped by this window." "Oh," said Cayley, raising his eyebrows. "Well," said he, "I suppose you must be right." Said I proudly, "I am, for the window is open." I said, "Oh, you incomparable ass." He understood now. It explained so much that had been puzzling him. He tried to put himself in Cayley's place. Cayley, when Antony had first discovered him, hammering at the door and crying, "Let me in." Whatever had happened inside the office, whoever had killed Robert, Cayley knew all about it, and knew that Mark was not inside, and had not escaped by the window. But it was necessary to Cayley's plans, to Mark's plans if they were acting in concert, that he should be thought so to have escaped. At some time, then, while he was hammering, the key in his pocket, at the locked door, he must suddenly have remembered, with what a shock, that a mistake had been made. A window had not been left open. Probably it would just have been a horrible doubt at first. Was the office window open? Surely it was open. Was it? Would he have time now to unlock the door, slip in, open the French windows, and slip out again? No. At any moment the servants might come. It was too risky, fatal, if he were discovered. But servants were stupid. He could get the windows safely open while they were crowding round the body. They wouldn't notice. He could do it somehow. And then Antony's sudden appearance. Here was a complication. And Antony suggesting that they should try the window. Why, the window was just what he wanted to avoid. No wonder he had seemed dazed at first. Ah, and here at last was the explanation why they had gone the longest way round and yet run. It was Cayley's only chance of getting a start on Antony, of getting to the windows first, of working them open somehow before Antony caught him up. Even if that were impossible, he must get there first just to make sure. Perhaps they were open. He must get away from Antony and see. And if they were shut, hopelessly shut, then he must have a moment too. Himself, a moment in which to think of some other plan and avoid the ruin which seemed so suddenly to be threatening. So he had run, but Antony had kept up with him. They had broken in the window together and gone into the office. But Cayley was not done yet. There was the dressing-room window. But quietly, Antony mustn't hear. And Antony didn't hear. Indeed, he had played up to Cayley splendidly. Not only had he called attention to the open window, but he had carefully explained to Cayley why Mark had chosen this particular window in preference to the office window. And Cayley had agreed that probably that was the reason. How he must have chuckled to himself. But he was still a little afraid. Afraid that Antony would examine the shrubbery. Why? Obviously, because there was no trace of anyone having broken through the shrubbery. No doubt Cayley had provided the necessary traces since, and had helped the inspector to find them. Had even gone as far as footmarks in Mark's shoes? But the ground was very hard. Perhaps footmarks were not necessary. Antony smiled as he thought of the big Cayley trying to squeeze into the dapper little Mark's shoes. Cayley must have been glad that footmarks were not necessary. No, the open window was enough. The open window and a broken twig or two. But quietly, Antony mustn't hear. And Antony had not heard. But he had seen a shadow on the wall. They were outside on the lawn again now, Bill and Antony, and Bill was listening open-mouthed to his friend's theory of yesterday's happenings. It fitted in, it explained things, but it did not get them any further. It only gave them another mystery to solve. "What's that?" said Antony. "Mark. Where's Mark? If he never went into the office at all, then where is he now?" I don't say that he never went into the office. In fact, he must have gone. Elsie heard him. He stopped and repeated slowly, "She heard him." At least she says she did. But if he was there, he came. Out again by the door. Well, but where does that lead you? Where it led Mark. The passage. Do you mean that he's been hiding there all the time? Anthony was silent until Bill had repeated his question, and then, with an effort, he came out of his thoughts and answered him. I don't know. But look here. Here is a possible explanation. I don't know if it is the right one. I don't know, Bill. I'm rather frightened. Frightened of what may have happened, of what may be going to happen. However, here is an explanation. See if you can find any fault with it. With his legs stretched out and his hands deep in his pockets, he lay back on the garden seat, looking up to the blue summer sky above him, and just as if he saw up there the events of yesterday being enacted over again, he described them slowly to Bill as they happened. We'll begin at the moment when Mark shoots Robert. Call it an accident. Probably it was. Mark would say it was anyhow. He is in a panic, naturally. But he doesn't lock the door and run away. For one thing, the key is on the outside of the door. For another, he is not quite such a fool as that. But he is in a horrible position. He is known to be on bad terms with his brother. He has just uttered some foolish threat to him, which may possibly have been overheard. What is he to do? He does the natural thing, the thing which Mark would always do in such circumstances. He consults Cayley, the invaluable, inevitable Cayley. Cayley is just outside. Cayley must have heard the shot. Cayley will tell him what to do. He opens the door just as Cayley is coming to see what is the matter. He explains rapidly. What's to be done, Kay? What's to be done? It was an accident. I swear it was an accident. He threatened me. He would have shot me if I hadn't. Think of something quick. Cayley has thought of something. Leave it to me, he says. You clear out altogether. I shot him, if you like. I'll do all the explaining. Get away. Hide. Nobody saw. You go in. Into the passage, quick. I'll come to you there as soon as I can. Good Cayley. Faithful Cayley. Mark's courage comes back. Cayley will explain, all right. Cayley will tell the servants that it was an accident. He will ring up the police. Nobody will suspect Cayley. Cayley has no quarrel with Robert. And then Cayley will come into the passage and tell him that it is all right, and Mark will go out by the other end and saunter slowly back to the house. He will be told the news by one of the servants. Robert accidentally shot? Good heavens! So, greatly reassured, Mark goes into the library, and Cayley goes to the door of the office and locks it, and then he bangs on the door and shouts, "Let me in." Anthony was silent. Bill looked at him and shook his head. Yes, Tony, but that doesn't make sense. What's the point of Cayley behaving like that? Anthony shrugged his shoulders without answering. And what has happened to Mark since? Anthony shrugged his shoulders again. Well, the sooner we go into that passage, the better, said Bill. You ready to go? Quite, said Bill, surprised. You're quite ready for what we may find. You're being dashed mysterious, old boy. I know I am. He gave a little laugh and went on, perhaps I'm being an ass, just a melodramatic ass. Well, I hope I am. He looked at his watch. It's safe, is it? They're still busy at the pond. We'd better make certain. Could you be a sleuth hound, Bill, one of those that travel on there? Stomachs very noiselessly? I mean, could you get near enough to the pond to make sure that Cayley is still there, without letting him see you? Rather. He got up eagerly. You wait. Anthony's head shot up suddenly. Why, that was what Mark said, he cried. Mark? Yes. What else he heard him say? Oh, that. Yes, I suppose she couldn't have made a mistake, Bill. She did hear him. She couldn't have mistaken his voice, if that's what you mean. Oh, Mark had an extraordinary characteristic. Voice. Oh, rather high-pitched, you know, and well, one can't explain, but yes. Well, rather like this, you know, or even more so if anything. He rattled these words off in Mark's rather monotonous, high-pitched voice, and then laughed and added in his natural voice, I say, that was really rather good. Anthony nodded quickly. That was like it, he said. Exactly. Yes. He got up and squeezed Bill's arm. We'll just go and see about Cayley, and then we'll get moving. I shall be in the library, right? Bill nodded and walked off in the direction of the pond. This was glorious fun. This was life. The immediate program could hardly be bettered. First of all, he was going to stalk Cayley. There was a little copse above the level of the pond, and about 100 yards away from it. He would come into this from the back, creep cautiously through it, taking care that no twigs cracked, and then, drawing himself on his stomach to the edge, peered down upon the scene below him. People were always doing that sort of thing in books, and he had been filled with a hopeless envy of them. Well, now he was actually going to do it himself. What fun! And then, when he had got back unobserved to the house and reported to Anthony, they were going to explore the secret passage. Again, what fun! Unfortunately, there seemed to be no chance of buried treasure, but there might be buried clues. Even if you found nothing, you couldn't get away from the fact that a secret passage was a secret passage, and anything might happen in it. But even that wasn't the end of this exciting day. They were going to watch the pond that night. They were going to watch Cayley under the moonlight, watch him as he threw into the silence of the pond. What? The revolver? Well, anyhow, they were going to watch him. What fun! To Anthony, who was older and who realized into what deep waters they were getting, it did not seem fun. But it was amazingly interesting. He saw so much, and yet somehow it was all out of focus. It was like looking at an opal and discovering with every movement of it some new color, some new gleam of light reflected, and yet never really seeing the opal as a whole. He was too near it, or too far away. He strained his eyes, and he relaxed his eyes. It was no good. His brain could not get hold of it. But there were moments when he almost had it, and then turned away from it. He had seen more of life than Bill, but he had never seen murder before, and this which was in his mind now, and to which he was afraid to listen, was not just the hot-blooded killing which any man may come to if he lose control. It was something much more horrible, too horrible to be true. Then let him look again for the truth. He looked again, but it was all out of focus. "I will not look again," he said aloud, as he began to walk towards the house. Not yet, anyway. He would go on collecting facts and impressions. Perhaps the one fact would come along by itself which would make everything clear. Chapter 14. Mr. Beverley qualifies for the stage. Bill had come back, and had reported, rather breathless, that Cayley was still at the pond. "But I don't think they're getting up much except mud," he said. "I ran most of the way back so as to give us as much time as possible." Anthony nodded. "Well, come along then," he said. The sooner, the quicker. They stood in front of the row of sermons. Anthony took down the Reverend Theodore Usher's famous volume and felt for the spring. Bill pulled. The shelves swung open towards them. "By Jove," said Bill, "it is a narrow way." There was an opening about a yard square in front of them, which had something the look of a brick fireplace, a fireplace raised about 2 feet from the ground. But, save for one row of bricks in front, the floor of it was emptiness. Anthony took a torch from his pocket and flashed it down into the blackness. "Look," he whispered to the eager Bill. "The steps begin down there. 6 feet. Down." He flashed his torch up again. There was a handhold of iron, a sort of large iron staple, in the bricks in front of them. "You swing off from there," said Bill. "At least, I suppose you do. I wonder how Ruth Norris liked doing it. Cayley help her, I should think. It's funny. Shall I go first?" asked Bill, obviously longing to do so. Anthony shook his head with a smile. "I think I will, if you don't mind very much, Bill. Just in case." "In case of what?" "Well, in case." Bill had to be content with that, but he was too much excited to wonder what Anthony meant. "Righto," he said. "Go on. Well, we'll just make sure we can get back again first. It really wouldn't be fair on the inspector if we got stuck down here for the rest of our lives. He's got enough to do trying to find Mark, but if he has to find you and me as well, we can always get out at the other end. Well, we're not certain yet. I think I'd better just go down and back. I promise faithfully not to. Explore. Right you are." Anthony sat down on the ledge of bricks, swung his feet over, and sat there for a moment, his legs dangling. He flashed his torch into the darkness again, so as to make sure where the steps began, then returned it to his pocket, seized the staple in front of him, and swung himself down. His feet touched the steps beneath him, and he let go. "Is it all right?" said Bill anxiously. "All right. I'll just go down to the bottom of the steps and back. Stay there." The light shone down by his feet. His head began to disappear. For a little while Bill, craning down the opening, could still see faint splashes of light and could hear slow, uncertain footsteps. For a little longer he could fancy that he saw and heard them. Then he was alone. Well, not quite alone. There was a sudden voice in the hall outside. "Good Lord," said Bill, turning round with a start. "Cayley." If he was not so quick in thought as Antony, he was quick enough in action. Thought was not. Demanded now. To close the secret doors safely but noiselessly, to make sure that the books were in the right places, to move away to another row of shelves, so as to be discovered deep in Badminton or Baedeker or whomever the kind God should send his aid. The difficulty was not to decide what to do, but to do all this in 5 seconds rather than in 6. "Ah, there you are," said Cayley from the doorway. "Hello," said Bill, in surprise, looking up from the 4th volume of the Life and Works of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. "Have they finished?" "Finish what?" "The pond," said Bill, wondering why he was reading Coleridge on such a fine afternoon. Desperately he tried to think of a good reason. Verifying a quotation, an argument with Antony, that would do. But what quotation? Oh no, they're still at it. Where's Gillingham? The ancient mariner, water, water, everywhere. Or was that something else? And where was Gillingham? Water, water, everywhere. Tony? Oh, he's about. Somewhere. We're just going down to the village. They aren't finding anything at the pond, are they? No, but they like doing it. Something off their minds when they can say they've done it. Bill, deep in his book, looked up and said yes, and went back to it again. He was just getting to the place. "What's the book?" said Cayley, coming up to him. Out of the corner of his eye he glanced at the shelf of sermons as he came. Bill saw that glance and wondered. Was there anything there to give? Away the secret? "I was just looking up a quotation," he drawled. "Tony and I had a bet about it. You know that thing about, water, water everywhere, and, not a drop to drink. But what on earth," he wondered to himself, "were they betting about? Nor any drop to drink, to be accurate." Bill looked at him in surprise. Then a happy smile came on his face. "Quite sure," he said. "Of course. Then you've saved me a lot of trouble. That's what the bet was about." He closed the book with a slam, put it back in its shelf, and began to feel for his pipe and tobacco. "I was a fool to bet with Tony," he added. "He always knows that sort of thing. So far, so good." But here was Cayley still in the library, and there was Antony, all unsuspecting, in the passage. When Antony came back, he would not be surprised to find the door closed, because the whole object of his going had been to see if he could open it easily from the inside. At any moment, then, the bookshelf might swing back and show Antony's head in the gap. A nice surprise for Cayley. "Come with us," he said casually, as he struck a match. He pulled vigorously at the flame as he waited for the answer, hoping to hide his anxiety, for if Cayley assented, he was done. "I've got to go into Stanton." Bill blew out a great cloud of smoke with an expiration which covered also a heartfelt sigh of relief. "Oh, a pity. You're driving, I suppose?" "Yes. The car will be here directly. There's a letter I must write first." He sat down at a writing table and took out a sheet of notepaper. He was facing the secret door. If it opened, he would see it. At any moment now it might open. Bill dropped into a chair and thought. Antony must be warned. Obviously. But how? How did one signal to anybody? By code. Morse code. Did Antony know it? Did Bill know it himself, if it came to that? He had picked up a bit in the army. Not enough to send a message, of course. But a message was impossible. Anyhow, Cayley would hear him tapping it out. It wouldn't do to send more than a single letter. What letters did he know? And what letter would convey anything to Antony? He pulled at his pipe, his eyes wandering from Cayley at his desk to the Reverend Theodore Usher in his shelf. What letter? C for Cayley. Would Antony understand? Probably not, but it was just worth trying. What was C? Long, short, Umpty-itty. Was that right? C, yes, that was C. He was sure of that. C. Umpty-itty. Hands in pockets, he got up and wandered across the room, humming vaguely to himself, the picture of a man waiting for another man, as it might be his friend Gillingham, to come in and take him away for a walk or something. He wandered across to the books at the back of Cayley and began to tap absent-mindedly on the shelves as he looked at the titles. Umpty-itty. Not that it was much like that at first. He couldn't get the rhythm of it. Twyiety. That was better. He was back at Samuel Taylor Coleridge now. Antony would begin to hear him soon. Twyiety. Just the aimless tapping of a man who is wondering what book he will take out with him to read on the lawn. Would Antony hear? One always heard the man in the next flat knocking out his pipe. Would Antony understand? Twyiety. See. For Cayley, Antony. Cayley's here. For God's sake, wait. Good Lord. Sermons, said Bill, with a loud laugh. Twyiety. Ever read? Cayley. What? Cayley looked up suddenly. Bill's back moved slowly along, his fingers beating a tattoo on the shelves as he walked. No, said Cayley, with a little laugh. An awkward, uncomfortable little laugh, it seemed to Bill. Nor do I. He was past the sermons now, past the secret door, but still tapping in the same aimless way. Oh, for God's sake, sit down, burst out Cayley. Or go outside if you want to walk about. Bill turned round in astonishment. Hello, what's the matter? Cayley was slightly ashamed of his outburst. Sorry, Bill, he apologized. My nerves are on edge. Your constant tapping and fidgeting about. Tapping, said Bill with an air of complete surprise. Tapping on the shelves and humming. Sorry, it got on my nerves. My dear old chap, I'm awfully sorry. I'll go out in the hall. It's all right, said Cayley, and went on with his letter. Bill sat down in his chair again. Had Antony understood? Well, anyhow, there was nothing to do now but wait. For Cayley to go. And if you ask me, said Bill to himself, much pleased, I ought to be on the stage. That's where I ought to be. The complete actor. A minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. 5 minutes. It was safe now. Antony guessed. Is the car there? Asked Cayley, as he sealed up his letter. Bill strolled into the hall, called back, yes, and went out to talk to the chauffeur. Cayley joined him, and they stood there for a moment. Hello, said a pleasant voice behind them. They turned round and saw Antony. Sorry to keep you waiting, Bill. With a tremendous effort, Bill restrained his feelings and said casually enough that it was all right. Well, I must be off, said Cayley. You're going down to the village? That's the idea. I wonder if you'd take this letter to Jallan's for me. Of course. Thanks very much. Well, I shall see you later. He nodded and got into the car. As soon as they were alone, Bill turned eagerly to his friend. Well, he said excitedly, come into the library. They went in, and Tony sank down into a chair. You must give me a moment, he panted. I've been running. Running? Well, of course. How do you think I got back here? You don't mean you went out at the other end? Antony nodded. I say, did you hear me tapping? I did indeed. Bill, you're a genius. Bill blushed. I knew you'd understand, he said. You guessed that I meant Cayley? I did. It was the least I could do after you had been so brilliant. You must. I've had rather an exciting time. Exciting? Good Lord, I should think it was. Tell me about it. As modestly as possible, Mr. Beverley explained his qualifications for a life on the stage. Good man, said Antony at the end of it. You are the most perfect Watson that ever lived. Bill, my lad, he went on dramatically, rising and taking Bill's hand in both of his, there is nothing that you and I could not accomplish together if we gave our minds to it. Silly old ass. That's what you always say when I'm being serious. Well, anyway, thanks awfully. You really saved us this time. Were you coming back? Yes. At least I think I was. I was just wondering when I heard you tapping. The fact of the door being shut was rather surprising. Of course, the whole idea was to see if it could be opened easily from the other side, but I felt somehow that you wouldn't shut it until the last possible moment, until you saw me coming back. Well, then I heard the taps, and I knew it must mean something, so I sat tight. Then when C began to come along, I said, Cayley, Bejo, bright, aren't I? And I simply hair to the other end of the passage for all I was worth. And hair back again, because I thought you might be getting rather involved in explanations about where I was and so on. You didn't see Mark then? No. Nor his, no, I didn't see anything. Nor what? Antony was silent for a moment. I didn't see anything, Bill. Or rather, I did see something. I saw a door in the wall, a cupboard, and it's locked. So if there's anything we want to find, that's where it is. Could Mark be hiding there? I called through the keyhole. In a whisper, Mark, are you there? He would have thought it was Cayley. There was no answer. Well, let's go down and try again. We might be able to get the door open. Antony, shook his head. "Aren't I going at all?" said Bill in great disappointment. When Antony spoke, it was to ask another question. "Can Cayley drive a car?" "Yes, of course." "What?" "Then he might easily drop the chauffeur at his lodge and go off to Stanton or wherever he wanted to, on his own?" "I suppose so, if he wanted to." "Yes." Antony got up. "Well, look here, as we said we were going into the village, and as we promised to leave that letter, I almost think we'd better do it." "Oh, very well." "Jallens, what were you telling me about that?" "Oh, yes, the widow Norbury." "That's right. Cayley used to be rather keen on the daughter. The letter's for her." "Yes, well, let's take it, just to be on the safe side." "Am I going to be done out of that secret passage altogether?" asked Bill fretfully. "There's nothing to see. Really, I promise you. You're very mysterious. What's upset you? You did see something down there. I'm certain of it." "I did, and I've told you about it." "No, you haven't. You only told me about the door in the wall." "That's it, Bill. And it's locked. And I'm frightened of what's behind it. But then we shall never know. What's there if we aren't going to look?" "We shall know tonight," said Antony, taking Bill's arm and leading him to the hall, "when we watch our dear friend Cayley dropping it into the pond." Chapter 15. Mrs. Norbury confides in dear Mr. Gillingham. They left the road and took the path across the fields which sloped gently downwards toward Jallens. Antony was silent, and since it is difficult to keep up a conversation with a silent man for any length of time, Bill had dropped into silence too, or rather, he hummed to himself, hit at thistles in the grass with a stick, and made uncomfortable noises with his pipe. But he noticed that his companion kept looking back over his shoulder, almost as if he wanted to remember for a future occasion the way by which they were coming. Yet there was no difficulty about it, for they remained all the time in view of the road, and the belt of trees above the long park wall, which bordered its further side, stood out clearly against the sky. Antony, who had just looked round again, turned back with a smile. "What's the joke?" said Bill, glad of the more social atmosphere. "Cayley, didn't you see?" "See what?" "The car, going past on the road there." "So that's what you were looking for. You got jolly good eyes, my boy, if you recognize the car at this distance after only seeing it twice." "Well, I've got jolly good eyes. I thought he was going to Stanton." "He hoped you'd think so, obviously." "Then where is he going?" "The library, probably, to consult our friend Usher." After making quite sure that his friends Beverley and Gillingham really were going to Jallens, as they said, Bill stopped suddenly in the middle of the path. "I say, do you think so?" Antony shrugged his shoulders. "I shouldn't be surprised. We must be devilishly inconvenient for him, hanging about the house. Any moment he can get, when we're definitely somewhere else, must be very useful to him." "Useful for what?" "Well, useful for his nerves, if for nothing else. We know he's mixed up in this business. We know he's hiding a secret or two. Even if he doesn't suspect that we're on his tracks, he must feel that at any moment we might stumble on something." Bill gave a grunt of assent, and they went slowly on again. "What about tonight?" he said, after a lengthy blow at his pipe. "Try a piece of grass," said Antony, offering it to him. Bill pushed it through the mouthpiece, blew again, said, "That's better," and returned the pipe to his pocket. "How are we going to get out without Cayley knowing?" "Well, that wants thinking over. It's going to be difficult. I wish we were sleeping at the inn." "Is this Miss Norbury, by any chance?" Bill looked up quickly. They were close to Jallens now, an old thatched farmhouse which, after centuries of sleep, had woken up to a new world, and had forthwith sprouted wings. Wings, however, of so discreet a growth that they had not brought with them any obvious change of character. And Jallens, even with a bathroom, was still Jallens. To the outward view, at any rate. Inside, it was more clearly Mrs. Norbury's. "Yes, Angela Norbury," murmured Bill. "Not bad-looking, is she?" The girl who stood by the little white gate of Jallens was something more than not bad-looking. But in this matter Bill was keeping his superlatives for another. In Bill's eyes she must be judged and condemned by all that distinguished her from Betty Calladine. To Antony, unhampered by these standards of comparison, she seemed quite simply beautiful. "Cayley asked us to bring a letter along," explained Bill when the necessary handshakings and introductions were over. "Here you are. You will tell him, won't you, How dreadfully sorry I am about what has happened. It seems so hopeless to say anything, so hopeless even to believe it. If it is true what we've heard. Bill repeated the outline of events of yesterday. Yes, and Mr. Ablett hasn't been found yet. She shook her head in distress. It still seems to have happened to somebody else, somebody we didn't know at all. Then, with a sudden grave smile, which included both of them, "But you must come and have some tea." "It's awfully decent of you," said Bill awkwardly. "But you will, won't you?" she said to Anthony. "Thank you very much." Mrs. Norbury was delighted to see them, as she always was to see any man in her house who came up to the necessary standard of eligibility. When her life work was completed and summed up in those beautiful words, "A marriage has been arranged and will shortly take place between Angela, daughter of the late John Norbury," then she would utter a grateful Nunc Dimittis and depart in peace to a better world, if heaven insisted, but preferably to her new son-in-law's more dignified establishment. For there was no doubt that eligibility meant not only eligibility as a husband, but it was not as eligibles that the visitors from the Red House were, received with such eagerness today. And even if her special smile for possibles was there, it was instinctive rather than reasoned. All that she wanted at this moment was news of Mark, for she was bringing it off at last. And if the engagement columns of the Morning Post were preceded, as in the case of its obituary columns, by a premonitory bulletin, the announcement of yesterday would have cried triumphantly to the world, or to such part of the world as mattered, "A marriage has very nearly been arranged by Mrs. Norbury, and will certainly take place between Angela, only daughter of the late John Norbury, and Mark Ablett of the Red House." And, coming across it on his way to the sporting page, Bill would have been surprised, for he had thought that, if anybody, it was Cayley. To the girl, it was neither. She was often amused by her mother's ways, sometimes ashamed of them, sometimes distressed by them. The Mark Ablett affair had seemed to her particularly distressing, for Mark was so obviously in league with her mother against her. Other suitors, upon whom her mother had smiled, had been embarrassed by that championship. Mark appeared to depend on it as much as on his own attractions, great though he thought these to be. They went a-wooing together. It was a pleasure to turn to Cayley, that hopeless ineligible. But alas, Cayley had misunderstood her. She could not imagine Cayley in love, until she saw it, and tried, too late, to stop it. That was 4 days ago. She had not seen him since, and now here was this letter. She dreaded opening it. It was a relief to feel that at least she had an excuse for not doing so while her guests were in the house. Mrs. Norbury recognized at once that Anthony was likely to be the more sympathetic listener, and when tea was over, and Bill and Angela had been dispatched to the garden with the promptness and efficiency of the expert, dear Mr. Gillingham found himself on the sofa beside her, listening too. Many things which were of even greater interest to him than she could possibly have hoped. "It is terrible, terrible," she said, and to suggest that dear Mr. Ablett, Anthony made suitable noises. "You've seen Mr. Ablett for yourself." A kinder, more warm-hearted man, Anthony explained that he had not seen Mr. Ablett. "Of course, yes, I was forgetting. But, believe me, Mr. Gillingham, you can trust a woman's intuition in these matters." Anthony said that he was sure of this. "Think of my feelings as a mother." Anthony was thinking of Miss Norbury's feelings as a daughter, and wondering if she guessed that her affairs were now being discussed with a stranger. Yet what could he do? What, indeed, did one do except listen, in the hope of learning? Mark engaged, or about to be engaged. Had that any bearing on the events of yesterday? What, for instance, would Mrs. Norbury have thought of Brother Robert, that family skeleton? Was this another reason for wanting Brother Robert out of the way? "I never liked him, never liked," said Anthony, bewildered. "That cousin of his, Mr. Cayley." "Oh, I ask you, Mr. Gillingham, am I the sort of woman to trust my little girl to a man who would go about shooting his only brother?" "I'm sure you wouldn't, Mrs. Norbury. If there has been any shooting done, it has been done by somebody else." Anthony looked at her inquiringly. "I never liked him," said Mrs. Norbury firmly. "Never." However, thought Anthony to himself, that didn't quite prove that Cayley was a murderer. How did Miss Norbury get on with him? He asked cautiously. There was nothing in that at all, said Miss Norbury's mother emphatically. Nothing. I would say so to anybody. Oh, I beg your pardon. I never meant nothing. I can say that for dear Angela with perfect confidence. Whether he made advances, she broke off with a shrug of her plump shoulders. Antony waited eagerly. Naturally they met. Possibly he might have, I don't know. But my duty as a... Mother was clear, Mr. Gillingham. Mr. Gillingham made an encouraging noise. I told him quite frankly that, how shall I put it, that he was trespassing. Tactfully, of course. But frankly. You mean, said Antony, trying to speak calmly, that you told him that, Mr. Ablett and her daughter? Mrs. Norbury nodded several times. Exactly, Mr. Gillingham. I had my duty as a mother. I am sure, Mrs. Norbury, that nothing would keep you from doing your duty. But it must have been disagreeable, particularly if you weren't quite sure. He was attracted, Mr. Gillingham, obviously attracted. Who would not be? Said Antony, with a charming smile. It must have been something of shock to him. It was just that which made me so glad that I had spoken. I saw at once that I had not spoken a moment too soon. There must have been a certain awkwardness about the next meeting, suggested Antony. Naturally, he has not been here since. No doubt they would have been bound to meet up at the Red House sooner or later. Oh, this was only quite lately? Last week, Mr. Gillingham. I spoke just in time. Ah, said Antony, under his breath. He had been waiting for it. He would have liked, now, to have gone away, so that he might have thought over the new situation by himself, or, perhaps preferably, to have changed partners for a little while with Bill. Miss Norbury would hardly be ready to confide in a stranger with the readiness of a mother, but he might have learnt something by listening to her. For which of them had she the greater feeling, Cayley or Mark? Was she really prepared to marry Mark? Did she love him, or the other, or neither? Mrs. Norbury was only a trustworthy witness in regard to her own actions and thoughts. He had learned all that was necessary of those, and only the daughter now had anything left to tell him. But Mrs. Norbury was still talking. Girls are so foolish, Mr. Gillingham, she was saying. It is fortunate that they have mothers to guide them. It was so obvious to me from the beginning that dear Mr. Ablett was just the husband for my little girl. You never knew him. Antony said again that he had not seen Mr. Ablett. Such a gentleman. So nice-looking in his artistic way. A regular Velasquez, I should say Van Dyke. Angela would have it that she could never marry a man with a beard. As if that mattered, when she broke off and Antony finished her sentence for her. The Red House is certainly charming, he said. Charming. Quite charming. And it is not as if Mr. Ablett's appearance were in any way undistinguished. Quite the contrary. I'm sure you agree with me? Antony said that he had never had the pleasure of seeing Mr. Ablett. Yes, and quite the center of the literary and artistic world. So desirable in every way. She gave a deep sigh and communed with herself for a little. Antony was about to snatch the opportunity of leaving when Mrs. Norbury began again. And then there's this scapegrace brother of his. He was perfectly frank with me, Mr. Gillingham. He would be. He told me of this brother, and I told him that I was quite certain it would make no difference to my daughter's feelings for him. After all, the brother was in Australia. When was this? Yesterday. Antony felt that, if Mark had only mentioned it after his brother's announcement of a personal call at the Red House, this perfect frankness had a good deal of wisdom behind it. It couldn't have been yesterday, Mr. Gillingham. Yesterday, she shuddered and shook her head. I thought perhaps he had been down here in the morning. Oh no, there is such a thing, Mr. Gillingham, as being too devoted a lover. Not in the morning, no. We both agreed that, dear Angela. Oh no. No, the day before yesterday, when he happened to drop in about tea time. It occurred to Antony that Mrs. Norbury had come a long way from her opening statement that Mark and Miss Norbury were practically engaged. She was now admitting that dear Angela was not to be rushed, that dear Angela had, indeed, no heart for the match at all. The day before yesterday. As it happened, dear Angela was out. Not that it mattered. He was driving to Middleston. He hardly had time for a cup of tea, so that even if she had been in, Antony nodded absently. This was something new. Why did Mark go to Middleston the day before yesterday? But after all, why shouldn't he? 100 reasons unconnected with the death of Robert might have taken him there. He got up to go. He wanted to be alone, at least with Bill. Mrs. Norbury had given him many things to think over, but the great outstanding fact which had emerged was this, that Cayley had reason to hate Mark. Mrs. Norbury had given him that reason. To hate? Well, to be jealous, anyhow. But that was enough. You see, he said to Bill, as they walked back, we know that Cayley is perjuring himself and risking himself over this business. And that must be for one of two reasons. Either to save Mark or to endanger him. That is to say, he is either wholeheartedly for him or wholeheartedly against him. Well, now we know that he is against him, definitely against him. But, I say, protested Bill, one doesn't necessarily try to ruin one's rival in love. Doesn't one? Said Anthony, turning to him with a smile. Bill blushed. Well, of course, one never knows. But you mightn't try to ruin him, Bill, but you wouldn't perjure yourself in order to get him out of trouble of his own making. Lord, no. So that of the two alternatives the other is the more likely. They had come to the gate into the last field which divided them from the road, and having gone through it, they turned round and leaned against it, resting for a moment and looking down at the house which they had left. Jolly little place, isn't it? Said Bill. Very, but rather mysterious. In what way? Well, where's the front door? The front door? Why, you've just come out of it. But isn't there a drive, or a road, or anything? Bill laughed. No, that's the beauty of it to some people. And that's why it's so cheap, and why the Norburys can afford it, I expect. They're not too well off. But what about luggage and tradesmen and that kind of thing? Oh, there's a cart track, but motor cars can't come any nearer than the road. He turned round and pointed. Up there. So the weekend millionaire people don't take it. At least, they'd have to build a road and a garage, and all the rest of it if they did. I see, said Anthony carelessly, and they turned round and continued their walk up to the road. But later on he remembered this casual conversation at the gate and saw the importance of it. Chapter 16. Getting ready for the night. What was it which Cayley was going to hide in that pond that night? Anthony thought that he knew now. It was Mark's body. From the beginning he had seen this answer coming and had drawn back from it. For if Mark had been killed, it seemed such a cold-blooded killing. Was Cayley equal to it? Bill would have said no, but that was because he had had breakfast with Cayley and lunch with him and dinner with him, had ragged him and played games with him. Bill would have said no, because Bill wouldn't have killed anybody in cold blood himself, and because he took it for granted that other people behaved pretty much as he did. But Anthony had no such illusions. Murders were done. Murder had actually been done here, for there was Robert's dead body. Why not another murder? Had Mark been in the office at all that afternoon? The only evidence, other than Cayley's, which obviously did not count, was Elsie's. Elsie was quite certain that she had heard his voice. But then Bill had said that it was a very characteristic voice, an easy voice, therefore, to imitate. If Bill could imitate it so successfully, why not Cayley? But perhaps it had not been such a cold-blooded killing, after all. Suppose Cayley had had a quarrel with his cousin that afternoon over the girl whom they were both wooing. Suppose Cayley had killed Mark, either purposely, in sudden passion, or accidentally, meaning only to knock him down. Suppose that this had happened in the passage, say about 2 o'clock, either because Cayley had deliberately led him there, or because Mark had casually suggested a visit to it. One could imagine Mark continually gloating over that secret passage. Suppose Cayley there, with the body at his feet, feeling already the rope round his neck, his mind darting this way and that in frantic search for a way of escape. And suppose that suddenly and irrelevantly he remembers that Robert is coming to the house at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Automatically he looks at his watch. In half an hour's time. In half an hour's time. He must think of something quickly. Shall he bury the body in the passage and let it be thought that Mark ran away, frightened at the mere thought of his brother's arrival? But there was the evidence of the breakfast table. Mark had seemed annoyed at this resurrection of the black sheep, but certainly not frightened. No, that was much too thin a story. But suppose Mark had actually seen his brother and had a quarrel with him. Suppose it could be made to look as if Robert had killed Mark. Anthony pictured to himself Cayley in the passage, standing over the dead body of his cousin and working it out. How could Robert be made to seem the murderer if Robert were alive to deny it? But suppose Robert were dead, too? He looks at his watch again. Only 25 minutes now. Suppose Robert were dead, too? Robert dead in the office, and Mark dead in the passage. How does that help? Madness. But if the bodies were brought together somehow, and Robert's death looked like suicide, was it possible? Madness again. Too difficult. Only 20 minutes now. Too difficult to arrange in 20 minutes. Can't arrange a suicide. Too difficult. Only 19 minutes. And then the sudden inspiration. Robert dead in the office. Mark's body hidden in the passage. Impossible to make Robert seem the murderer. But how easy to make Mark. Robert dead and Mark missing. Why? It jumped to the eye at once. Mark had killed Robert. Accidentally. Yes, that would be more likely. And then had run away. Sudden panic. He looks at his watch again. 15 minutes, but plenty of time now. The thing arranges itself. Was that the solution? Anthony wondered. It seemed to fit in with the facts as they knew them. But then, so did that other theory which he had suggested to Bill in the morning. Which one? Said Bill. They had come back from Jallin's through the park, and were sitting in the copse above the pond, from which the inspector and his fishermen had now withdrawn. Bill had listened with open mouth to Anthony's theory, and save for an occasional, "By Jove," had listened in silence. Smart man, Cayley, had been his only comment at the end. Which other theory? That Mark had killed Robert accidentally and had gone to Cayley for help, and that Cayley, having hidden him in the passage, locked the office door from the outside and hammered on it. Yes, but you were so dashed mysterious about that. I asked you what the point of it was, and you wouldn't say anything. He thought for a little, and then went on. I suppose you meant that Cayley deliberately betrayed Mark and tried to make him look like a murderer? I wanted to warn you that we should probably find Mark in the passage, alive or dead. And now you don't think so? Now I think that his dead body is there, meaning that Cayley went down and killed him afterwards, after you had come, after the police had come? Well, that's what I shrink from, Bill. It's so horribly cold-blooded. Cayley may be capable of it, but I hate to think of it. But, dash it all, your other way is cold-blooded enough. According to you, he goes up to the office and deliberately shoots a man with whom he has no quarrel, whom he hasn't seen for 15 years. Yes, but to save his own neck. That makes a difference. My theory is that he quarreled violently with Mark over the girl and killed him in sudden passion. Anything that happened after that would be self-defense. I don't mean that I excuse it, but that I understand it. And I think that Mark's dead body is in the passage now, and has been there since, say, 2:30 yesterday afternoon. And tonight, Cayley is going to hide it in the pond. Bill pulled at the moss on the ground beside him, threw away a handful or two, and said slowly, You may be right, but it's all guesswork, you know. Anthony laughed. Good Lord, of course it is, he said. And tonight we shall know if it's a good guess or a bad one. Bill brightened up suddenly. Tonight, he said. I say, tonight's going to be rather fun. How do we work it? Anthony was silent for a little. Of course, he said at last, we ought to inform the police so that they can come here and watch the pond tonight. Of course, grinned Bill. But I think that perhaps it is a little early to put our theories before them. I think perhaps it is, said Bill solemnly. Anthony looked up at him with a sudden smile. Bill, you old bounder. Well, dash it, it's our show. I don't see why we shouldn't get our little bit of fun out of it. Neither do I. All right, then, we'll do without the police tonight. We shall miss them, said Bill sadly. But 'tis better so. There were two problems in front of them. First, the problem of getting out of the house without being discovered by Cayley, and secondly, the problem of recovering whatever it was which Cayley dropped into the pond that night. Let's look at it from Cayley's point of view, said Anthony. He may not know that we're on his track, but he can't help being suspicious of us. He's bound to be suspicious of everybody in the house, and more particularly of us, because we're presumably more intelligent than the others. He stopped for a moment to light his pipe, and Bill took the opportunity of looking more intelligent than Mrs. Stevens. Now, he has got something to hide tonight, and he's going to take good care that we aren't watching him. Well, what will he do? See that we are asleep first, before he starts out. Yes, come and tuck us up, and see that we're nice and comfortable. Yes, that's awkward, said Bill. But we could lock our doors, and then he wouldn't know that we weren't there. Have you ever locked your door? Never. No. And you can bet that Cayley knows that. Anyway, he'd bang on it, and you wouldn't answer. And then what would he think? Bill was silent, crushed. Then I don't see how we're going to do it, he said, after deep thought. He'll obviously come to us just before he starts out, and that doesn't give us time to get to the pond in front of him. Let's put ourselves in his place, said Anthony, puffing slowly at his pipe. He's got the body, or whatever it is, in the passage. He won't come up the stairs, carrying it in his arms, and look in at our doors to see if we're awake. He'll have to make sure about us first, and then go down for the body afterwards. So that gives us a little time. Why, yes, said Bill thoughtfully. We might just do it, but it'll be a bit of a rush. But wait, when he's gone down to the passage and got the body, what'll he do next? Come out again, said Bill helpfully. Yes, but which end? Bill sat up with a start. By Jove, you mean that he will go out at the far end by the bowling green? Don't you think so? Just imagine him walking across the lawn in full view of the house, at midnight, with a body in his arms. Think of the awful feeling he would have in the back of the neck, wondering if anybody, any restless sleeper, had chosen just that moment to wander to the window and look out into the night. There's still plenty of moonlight, Bill. Is he going to walk across the park in the moonlight with all those windows staring at him? Not if he can help it, but he can get out by the bowling green and then come to the pond without ever being in sight of the house at all. You're right, and that will just about give us time. Good. Now, what's the next thing? The next thing is to mark the exact place in the pond where he drops, whatever he drops, so that we can fish it out again. If we can see what it is, we shan't want to. The police can have a go at it tomorrow, but if it's something we can't identify from a distance, then we must try and get it out, to see whether it's worth telling the police about. Why, yes, said Bill, wrinkling his forehead. Of course, the trouble with water is that one bit of it looks pretty much like the next bit. I don't know if that had occurred to you. It had, smiled Anthony. Let's come and have a look at it. They walked to the edge of the copse and laid down there in silence, looking at the pond beneath them. See anything? Said Anthony at last. What? The fence on the other side. What about it? Well, it's rather useful, that's all, said Sherlock Holmes enigmatically, added Bill. A moment later, his friend Watson had hurled him into the pond. Anthony laughed. I love being Sherlocky, he said. It's very unfair of you not to play up to me. Why is that fence useful? My dear Holmes, said Bill obediently, because you can take a bearing on it. You see. Yes, you needn't stop to. Explain to me what a bearing is. I wasn't going to, but you're lying here. He looked up underneath this pine tree. Cayley comes out in the old boat and drops his parcel in. You take a line from here onto the boat and mark it off on the fence there. Say it's the 5th post from the end. Well, then I take a line from my tree, will find one for me directly, and it comes on to the 20th post, say, and where the 2 lines meet, there shall the eagles be gathered together. QED. And there I almost forgot to remark, will the taller eagle, Beverley by name, do his famous diving act, as performed nightly at the Hippodrome. Bill looked at him uneasily. I say, really? It's beastly dirty water, you know. I'm afraid so, Bill. So it is written in the book of Jasher. Of course I knew that one of us would have to, but I hoped. Oh well, it's a warm night. Just a night for a bathe, agreed Anthony, getting up. Well now, let's have a look for my tree. They walked down to the margin of the pond and then looked back. Bill's tree stood up and took the evening, tall and unmistakable, 50 feet nearer to heaven than its neighbors. But it had its fellow at the other end of the copse, not quite so tall, perhaps, but equally conspicuous. That's where I shall be, said Anthony, pointing to it. Now, for the Lord's sake, count your posts accurately. Thanks very much, but I shall do it for my own sake, said Bill with feeling. I don't want to spend the whole night diving. Fix on the post in a straight line with you and the splash, and then count backwards to the beginning of the fence. Right, old boy. Leave it to me. I can do this on my head. Well, that's how you will have to do the last part of it, said Anthony with a smile. He looked at his watch. It was nearly time to change for dinner. They started to walk back to the house together. There's one thing which worries me rather, said Anthony. Where does Cayley sleep? Next door to me. What? Well, it's just possible that he might have another look at you after he's come back from the pond. I don't think he'd bother about it in the ordinary way, but if he is actually passing your door, I think he might glance in. I shan't be there. I shall be at the bottom of the pond, sucking up mud. Yes. Do you think you could leave something in your bed that looked vaguely like you in the dark? A bolster with a pajama coat round it, and one arm outside the blanket, and a pair of socks or something for the head. You know, the kind of thing. I think it would please him to feel that you were still sleeping peacefully. Bill chuckled to himself. Rather. I'm awfully good at that. I'll make him up something really good. But what about you? I'm at the other end of the house. He's hardly likely to bother about me a second time, and I shall be so very fast asleep at his first visit. Still, I may as well, to be on the safe side. They went into the house. Cayley was in the hall as they came in. He nodded and took out his watch. Time of change, he said. Just about, said Bill. You didn't forget my letter? I did not. In fact, we had tea there. He looked away and said carelessly, how were they all? They sent all sorts of sympathetic messages to you and all that sort of thing. Oh, yes. Bill waited for him to say something more, and then, as nothing was coming, he turned round, said, come on, Tony, and led the way upstairs. Got all you want? He said at the top of the stairs. I think so. Come and see me before you go down. Righto. Anthony shut his bedroom door behind him and walked over to the window. He pushed open a casement and looked out. His bedroom was just over the door at the back of the house. The side wall of the office, which projected out into the lawn beyond the rest of the house, was on his left. He could step out on to the top of the door, and from there drop easily to the ground. Getting back would be a little more difficult. There was a convenient water pipe which would help. He had just finished his dressing when Bill came in. Final instructions, he asked, sitting down on the bed. By the way, how are we amusing ourselves after dinner? I mean immediately after dinner. Billiards? Righto. Anything you like. Don't talk too loud, said Anthony in a lower voice. We're more or less over the hall, and Cayley may be there. He led the way to the window. We'll go out this way tonight. Going downstairs is too risky. It's easy. Enough. Better put on tennis shoes. Right. I say, in case I don't get another chance alone with you. What do I do when Cayley comes to tuck me up? It's difficult to say. Be as natural as you can. I mean, if he just knocks lightly and looks in, be asleep. Don't overdo the snoring. But if he makes a hell of a noise, you'll have to wake up and rub your eyes and wonder what on earth he's doing in your room at all. You know the sort of thing? Right. And about the dummy figure. I'll make it up. Directly we come upstairs and hide it under the bed. Yes. I think we'd better go completely to bed ourselves. We shan't take a moment dressing again, and it will give him time to get safely into the passage. Then come into my room. Right. Are you ready? Yes. They went downstairs together. Chapter 17. Mr. Beverley takes the water. Cayley seemed very fond of them that night. After dinner was over, he suggested a stroll outside. They walked up and down the gravel in front of the house, saying very little to each other, until Bill could stand it no longer. For the last 20 turns, he had been slowing down, hopefully each time they came to the door, but the hint had always been lost on his companions, and each time another turn had been taken. But in the end, he had been firm. What about a little billiards? He said, shaking himself free from the others. Will you play? Said Anthony to Cayley. I'll watch you, he said, and he had watched them resolutely until the game, and then another game after that, had been played. They went into the hall and attacked the drinks. Well, thank heaven for bed, said Bill, putting down his glass. Are you coming? Yes, said Anthony, and finished his drink. He looked at Cayley. I've just got one or two little things to do, said Cayley. I shan't be long following you. Well, good night, then. Good night. Good night, called Bill from halfway up the stairs. Good night, Tony. Good night. Bill looked at his watch. 11:30. Not much chance of anything happening for another hour. He pulled open a drawer and wondered what to wear on their expedition. Gray flannel trousers, flannel shirt, and a dark coat, perhaps a sweater, as they might be lying out in the copse for some time. And, good idea, a towel. He would want it later on, and meanwhile he could wear it round his waist. Tennis shoes. There. Everything was ready. Now, then for the dummy figure. He looked at his watch again before getting Into bed. 12:15. How long to wait before Cayley came up? He turned out the light, and then, standing by the door in his pajamas, waited for his eyes to become accustomed to the new darkness. He could only just make out the bed in the corner of the room. Cayley would want more light than that if he were to satisfy himself from the door that the bed was occupied. He pulled the curtains a little way back. That was about right. He could have another look later on, when he had the dummy. Figure in the bed. How long would it be before Cayley came up? It wasn't that he wanted his friends, Beverley and Gillingham, to be asleep before he started on his business at the pond. All that he wanted was to be sure that they were safely in their bedrooms. Cayley's business would make no noise, give no sign, to attract the most wakeful member of the household, so long as the household was really inside the house. But if he wished to reassure himself about his guests, he would have to wait until they were far enough on their way to sleep not to be disturbed by him as he came up to reassure himself. So it amounted to the same thing, really. He would wait until they were asleep. Until they were asleep? Asleep. With a great effort, Bill regained the mastery over his wandering thoughts and came awake again. This would never do. It would be fatal if he went asleep. If he went asleep? To sleep. And then, in an instant, he was intensely awake. Suppose Cayley never came at all. Suppose Cayley was so unsuspicious that, as soon as they had gone upstairs, he had dived down into the passage and set about his business. Suppose, even now, he was at the pond, dropping into it that secret of his. Good heavens, what fools they had been! How could Antony have taken such a risk? Put yourself in Cayley's place, he had said. But how was it possible? They weren't Cayley. Cayley was at the pond now. They would never know what he had dropped into it. Listen, somebody. At the door. He was asleep. Quite naturally now. Breathe a little more loudly, perhaps. He was asleep. The door was opening. He could feel it opening behind him. Good Lord, suppose Cayley really was a murderer. Why, even now he might be. No, he mustn't think of that. If he thought of that, he would have to turn round. He mustn't turn round. He was asleep, just peacefully asleep. But why didn't the door shut? Where was Cayley now? Just behind him? And in his hand? No, he mustn't think of that. He was asleep. But why didn't the door shut? The door was shutting. There was a sigh from the sleeper in the bed, a sigh of relief which escaped him involuntarily. But it had a very natural sound, a deep breath from a heavy sleeper. He added another one to it to make it seem more natural. The door was shut. Bill counted 100 slowly and then got up. As quickly and as noiselessly as possible, he dressed himself in the dark. He put the dummy figure in the bed, arranged the clothes so that just enough, but not too much of it was showing, and stood by the door looking at it. For a casual glance, the room was just about light enough. Then very quietly, very slowly, he opened the door. All was still. There was no light from beneath the door of Cayley's room. Very quietly, very carefully, he crept along the passage to Antony's room. He opened the door and went in. Antony was still in bed. Bill walked across to wake him up and then stopped rigid, and his heart thumped against his ribs. There was somebody else in the room. "All right, Bill," said a whispering voice, and Antony stepped out from the curtains. Bill gazed at him without saying anything. "Rather good, isn't it?" said Antony, coming closer and pointing to the bed. "Come on. The sooner we get out now, the better." He led the way out of the window, the silent Bill following him. They reached the ground safely and noiselessly, went quickly across the lawn and so, over the fence into the park. It was not until they were out of sight of the house that Bill felt it safe to speak. "I quite thought it was you in bed," he said. "I hope you would. I shall be rather disappointed now if Cayley doesn't call again. It's a pity to waste it. He came all right just now?" "Oh, rather. What about you?" Bill explained his feelings picturesquely. "There wouldn't have been much point in his killing you," said Antony prosaically, "besides being too risky." "Oh," said Bill. And then, "I had rather hoped that it was his love for me which restrained him." Antony laughed. "I doubt it. You didn't turn up your light when you dressed?" "Good Lord, no. Did you want me to?" Antony laughed again and took him by the arm. "You're a splendid conspirator, Bill. You and I could take on anything together." The pond was waiting for them, more solemn in the moonlight. The trees which crowned the sloping bank on the far side of it were mysteriously silent. It seemed that they had the world very much to themselves. Almost. Unconsciously, Antony spoke in a whisper. "There's your tree. There's mine. As long as you don't move, there's no chance of his seeing you. After he's gone, don't come out till I do. He won't be here for a quarter of an hour or so don't be impatient." "Righto," whispered Bill. Antony gave him a nod and a smile, and they walked off to their posts. The minutes went by slowly. To Antony, lying hidden in the undergrowth at the foot of his tree, a new problem was presenting itself. Suppose Cayley had to make more than one journey that night. He might come back to find them in the boat, one of them, indeed, in the water. And if they decided to wait in hiding on the chance of Cayley coming back again, what was the least time they could safely allow? Perhaps it would be better to go round to the front of the house and watch for his return there, the light in his bedroom, before conducting their experiments at the pond. But then they might miss his second visit in this way, if he made a second visit. It was difficult. His eyes were fixed on the boat as he considered these things, and suddenly, as if materialized from nowhere, Cayley was standing by the boat. In his hand was a small brown bag. Cayley put the bag in the bottom of the boat, stepped in, and using an oar as a punt pole, pushed slowly off. Then, very silently, he rowed towards the middle of the pond. He had stopped. The oars rested on the water. He picked up the bag from between his feet, leant over the nose of the boat, and rested it lightly on the water for a moment. Then he let go. It sank slowly. He waited there, watching, afraid, perhaps, that it might rise again. Antony began to count, and now Cayley was back at his starting place. He tied up the boat, looked carefully round to see that he had left no traces behind him, and then turned to the water again. For a long time, as it seemed to the watchers, he stood there, very big, very silent in the moonlight. At last he seemed satisfied. Whatever his secret was, he had hidden it, and so, with a gentle sigh, as unmistakable to Antony as if he had heard it, Cayley turned away and vanished again as quietly as he had come. Antony gave him 3 minutes and stepped out from the trees. He waited there for Bill to join him. "6," whispered Bill. Antony nodded. "I'm going round to the front of the house. You get back to your tree and watch, in case Cayley comes again. Your bedroom is the left-hand end one, and Cayley's the end but one. Is that right?" Bill nodded. "Right. Wait in hiding till I come back. I don't know how long I shall be, but don't be impatient. It will seem longer than it is." He patted Bill on the shoulder, and with a smile and a nod of the head, he left him there. What was in the bag? What could Cayley want to hide other than a key or a revolver? Keys and revolvers sink of themselves. No need to put them in a bag first. What was in the bag? Something which wouldn't sink of itself. Something which needed to be helped. With stones before it would hide itself safely in the mud. Well, they would find that out. There was no object in worrying about it now. Bill had a dirty night's work in front of him. But where was the body which Antony had expected so confidently? Or, if there were no body, where was Mark? More immediately, however, where was Cayley? As quickly as he could, Antony had got to the front of the house and was now lying in the shrubbery which bordered the lawn, waiting for the light to go up in. Cayley's window. If it went up in Bill's window, then they were discovered. It would mean that Cayley had glanced into Bill's room, had been suspicious of the dummy figure in the bed, and had turned up the light to make sure. After that, it was war between them. But if it went up in Cayley's room, there was a light. Antony felt a sudden thrill of excitement. It was in Bill's room. War. The light stayed there, shining vividly, for a wind had come up, blowing the moon behind a cloud and casting a shadow over the rest of the house. Bill had left his curtains undrawn. It was careless of him, the first stupid thing he had done, but the moon slipped out again, and Antony laughed to himself in the bushes. There was another window beyond Cayley's, and there was no light in it. The declaration of war was postponed. Antony lay there, watching Cayley into bed. After all, it was only polite to return Cayley's own solicitude earlier in the night. Politeness demanded that one should not disport oneself on the pond until one's friends were comfortably tucked up. Meanwhile, Bill was getting tired of waiting. His chief fear was that he might spoil everything by forgetting the number 6. It was the 6th post. 6. He broke off a twig and divided it into 6 pieces. These he arranged on the ground in front of him. 6. He looked at the pond, counted up to the 6th post, and murmured 6 to himself again. Then he looked down at his twigs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. Was it 7? Or was that 7th bit of a twig an accidental bit which had been on the ground anyhow? Surely it was 6. Had he said 6 to Antony? If so, Antony would remember, and it was all right. 6. He threw away the 7th twig and collected the other 6 together. Perhaps they would be safer in his pocket. 6. The height of a tall man, well, his own height. 6 feet. Yes, that was the way to remember it. Feeling a little safer on the point, he began to wonder about the bag, and what Antony would say to it, and the possible depth of the water and of the mud at the bottom, and was still so wondering and saying, "Good Lord, what a life!" to himself when Antony reappeared. Bill got up and came down the slope to meet him. 6, he said firmly. 6th post from the end. Good, smiled Antony. Mine was the 18th, a little way past it. What did you go off for? To see Cayley into bed. Is it all right? Yes. Better hang your coat over the 6th post, and then we shall see it more easily. I'll put mine on the 18th. Are you going to undress here or in the boat? Some here and some in the boat. You're quite sure that you wouldn't like to do the diving yourself? Quite, thanks. They had walked round to the other side of the pond. Coming to the 6th post of the fence, Bill took off his coat and put it in position, and then finished his undressing, while Antony went off to mark the 18th post. When they were ready, they got into the boat, Antony taking the oars. Now, Bill, tell me as soon as I'm in line with your 2 marks. He rowed slowly towards the middle of the pond. You're about there now, said Bill at last. Antony stopped rowing and looked about him. Yes, that's pretty well right. He turned the boat's nose round until it was pointing to the pine tree under which Bill had lain. You see my tree and the other coat? Yes, said Bill. Right. Now then, I'm going to row gently along this line until we're dead in. Between the 2, get as exact as you can, for your own sake. Steady, said Bill warningly. Back a little more forward again. Right. Antony left the oars on the water and looked around. As far as he could tell, they were in an exact line with each pair of landmarks. Now then, Bill, in you go. Bill pulled off his shirt and trousers and stood up. You mustn't dive from the boat, old boy, said Antony hastily. You'll shift its position. Slide in gently. Bill slid in from the stern and swam slowly round to Antony. What's it like? Said Antony. Cold. Well, here's luck to it. He gave a sudden kick, flashed for a moment in the water, and was gone. Antony steadied the boat and took another look at his landmarks. Bill came up behind him with a loud explosion. It's pretty muddy, he protested. Weeds. No. Thank the Lord. Well, try again. Bill gave another kick and disappeared. Again, Antony coaxed the boat back into position, and again Bill popped up, this time in front of him. I feel that if I threw you a sardine, said Antony, with a smile, you'd catch it in your mouth quite prettily. It's awfully easy to be funny from where you are. How much longer have I got to go on doing this? Antony looked at his watch. About 3 hours. We must get back before daylight. But be quicker if you can, because it's rather cold for me sitting here. Bill flicked a handful of water at him and disappeared again. He was under for almost a minute this time, and there was a grin on his face when it was visible again. I've got it, but it's devilish hard to get up. I'm not sure that it isn't too heavy for me. That's all right, said Antony. He brought out a ball of thick string from his pocket. Get this through the handle if you can, and then we can both pull. Good man. He paddled to the side, took one end of the string, and paddled back again. Now then, 2 minutes later the bag was safely in the boat. Bill clambered in. After it, and Antony rowed back. Well done, Watson, he said quietly as they landed. He fetched their 2 coats, and then waited, the bag in his hand, while Bill dried and dressed himself. As soon as the latter was ready, he took his arm and led him into the copse. He put the bag down and felt in his pockets. I shall light a pipe before I open it, he said. What about you? Yes. With great care they filled and lit their pipes. Bill's hand was a little unsteady. Antony noticed it and gave him a reassuring smile. Ready? Yes. They sat down, and taking the bag between his knees, Anthony pressed the catch and opened it. "Clothes," said Bill. Anthony pulled out the top garment and shook it out. It was a wet brown flannel coat. "Do you recognize it?" he asked. "Mark's brown flannel suit. The one he is advertised as having run away in?" "Yes, it looks like it." Of course he had a dashed lot of clothes. Anthony put his hand in the breast pocket and took out some letters. He considered them doubtfully for a moment. "I suppose I'd better read them," he said. "I mean, just to see." He looked inquiringly at Bill, who nodded. Anthony turned on his torch and glanced at them. Bill waited anxiously. "Yes, Mark. Hello. What is it?" "The letter that Cayley was telling the inspector about. From Robert. Mark, your loving brother is coming to see you. Yes, I suppose I had better keep this." "Well, that's his coat. Let's have out the rest of it." He took the remaining clothes from the bag and spread them out. "They're all here," said Bill. "Shirt, tie, socks, underclothes, shoes, yes, all of them." "All that he was wearing yesterday?" "Yes." "What do you make of it?" Bill shook his head and asked another question. "Is it what you expected?" Anthony laughed suddenly. "It's too absurd," he said. "I expected. Well, you know what I expected. A body in a suit of clothes. Well, perhaps it would be safer to hide them separately. The body here and the clothes in the passage where they would never betray themselves. And now he takes a great deal of trouble to hide the clothes here and doesn't bother about the body at all." He shook his head. "I'm a bit lost for the moment, Bill, and that's the fact. Anything else there?" Anthony felt in the bag. "Stones and, yes, there's something else." He took it out and held it up. "There we are, Bill. It was the office key. By Jove, you were right." Anthony felt in the bag again and then turned it gently, upside down on the grass. A dozen large stones fell out, and something else. He flashed down his torch. "Another key," he said. He put the 2 keys in his pocket and sat there for a long time in silence, thinking. Bill was silent, too, not liking to interrupt his thoughts, but at last he said, "Shall I put these things back?" Anthony looked up with a start. "What? Oh, yes. No, I'll put them back. You give me a light, will you?" Very slowly and carefully, he put the clothes back in the bag, pausing as he took up each garment, in the certainty, as it seemed to Bill, that it had something to tell him, if only he could read it. When the last of them was inside, he still waited there on his knees, thinking. "That's the lot," said Bill. Anthony nodded at him. "Yes, that's the lot," he said, "and that's the funny thing about it." "You're sure it is the lot?" "What do you mean?" "Give me the torch a moment." He took it and flashed it over the ground between them. "Yes, that's the lot. It's funny." He stood up, the bag in his hands. "Now let's find a hiding place for these." And then he said no more, but stepped off through the trees, Bill following him meekly. As soon as they had got the bag off their hands and were clear of the cops, Anthony became more communicative. He took the 2 keys out of his pocket. "One of them is the office key, I suppose, and the other is the key of the passage cupboard. So I thought that perhaps we might have a look at the cupboard." "I say, do you really think it is?" "Well, I don't see what else it can be. But why should he want to throw it away?" "Because it has now done its work, whatever it was, and he wants to wash his hands of the passage. He'd throw the passage away if he could. I don't think it matters much one way or another, and I don't suppose there's anything to find in the cupboard, but I feel that we must look." "Do you still think Mark's body might be there?" "No, and yet where else can it be? Unless I'm hopelessly wrong, and Cayley never killed him at all." Bill hesitated, wondering if he dare advance his theory. "I know you'll think me an ass. My dear Bill, I'm such an obvious ass myself that I should be delighted to think you are too. Well, then, suppose Mark did kill Robert, and Cayley helped him to escape, just as we thought at first. I know you proved afterwards that it was impossible, but suppose it happened in a way we don't know about, and for reasons we don't know about. I mean, there are such a lot of funny things about the whole show that, well, almost anything might have happened." "You're quite right." Well, then, this clothes business. Doesn't that seem rather to bear out the escaping theory? Mark's brown suit was known to the police. Couldn't Cayley have brought him another one in the passage to escape in, and then have had the brown one on his hands, and thought it safest to hide it in the pond? "Yes," said Anthony thoughtfully. "Then go on." Bill went on, eagerly. It all seems to fit in, you know? I mean, even with your first theory, that Mark killed him accidentally and then came to Cayley for help. Of course, if Cayley had played fair, he'd have told Mark that he had nothing to be afraid of. But he isn't playing fair. He wants to get Mark out of the way because of the girl. Well, this is his chance. He makes Mark as frightened as possible and tells him that his only hope is to run away. Well, naturally, he does all he can to get him well away. Because if Mark is caught, the whole story of Cayley's treachery comes out. Yes, but isn't it overdoing it rather to make him change his underclothes and everything? It wastes a good deal of time, you know. Bill was pulled up short and said, "Oh," in great disappointment. "No, it's not as bad as that, Bill," said Anthony with a smile. "I dare say the underclothes could be explained. But here's the difficulty. Why did Mark need to change from brown to blue, or whatever it was when Cayley was the only person who saw him in brown? The police description of him says that he is in a brown suit. Yes, because Cayley told the police. You see, even if Mark had had lunch in his brown suit, and the servants had noticed it, Cayley could always have pretended that he had changed into blue after lunch, because only Cayley saw him afterwards. So if Cayley had told the inspector that he was wearing blue, Mark could have escaped quite comfortably in his brown, without needing to change yet. "All, but that's just what he did do," cried Bill triumphantly. "What fools we are!" Anthony looked at him in surprise, and then shook his head. "Yes, yes," insisted Bill. "Of course. Don't you see? Mark did change after lunch, and, to give him more of a chance of getting away, Cayley lied and said that he was wearing the brown suit in which the servants had seen him. Well, then he was afraid that the police might examine Mark's clothes and find the brown suit still there. So he hid it, and then dropped it in the pond afterwards." He turned eagerly to his friend, but Anthony said nothing. Bill began to speak again, and was promptly waved into silence. "Don't say anything more, old boy. You've given me quite enough to think about. Don't let's bother about it tonight. We'll just have a look at this cupboard and then get to bed." But the cupboard had not much to tell them that night. It was empty save for a few old bottles. "Well, that's that," said Bill. But Anthony, on his knees, with the torch in his hand, continued to search for something. "What are you looking for?" asked Bill at last. "Something that isn't there," said Anthony, getting up and dusting his trousers. And he locked the door again. Chapter 18. Guesswork. The inquest was at 3 o'clock. Thereafter Anthony could have no claim on the hospitality of the Red House. By 10 o'clock his bag was packed, and waiting to be taken to the George. To Bill, coming upstairs after a more prolonged breakfast, this early morning bustle was a little surprising. "What's the hurry?" he asked. "None. But we don't want to come back here after the inquest. Get your packing over now, and then we can have the morning to ourselves." "Righto." He turned to go to his room, and then came back again. "I say, are we going to tell Cayley that we're staying at the George?" "You're not staying at the George, Bill. Not officially. You're going back to London." "Oh, yes. Ask Cayley to have your luggage sent into Stanton, ready for you when you catch a train there after the inquest. You can tell him that you've got to see the Bishop of London at once. The fact that you are hurrying back to London to be confirmed will make it seem more natural that I should resume my interrupted solitude at the George as soon as you have gone. Then where do I sleep tonight? Officially, I suppose, in Fulham Place. Unofficially, I suspect, in my bed, unless they've got another spare room at the George. I've put your confirmation robe, I mean your pajamas and brushes and things, in my bag, ready for you. Is there anything else you want to know? No? Then go and pack. And meet me at 10:30 beneath the blasted oak or in the hall or somewhere. I want to talk and talk and talk, and I must have my Watson." "Good," said Bill, and went off to his room. An hour later, having communicated their official plans to Cayley, they wandered out together into the park. "Well," said Bill, as they sat down underneath a convenient tree. "Talk away." "I had many bright thoughts in my bath this morning," began Anthony. "The brightest one of all was that we were being damned fools and working at this thing from the wrong end altogether." "Well, that's helpful. Of course it's very hampering being a detective when you don't know anything about detecting and when nobody knows that you're doing detection and you can't have people up to cross-examine them, and you have neither the energy nor the means to make proper inquiries, and In short, when you're doing the whole thing in a thoroughly amateur, haphazard way. For amateurs, I don't think we're doing it all badly, protested Bill. No, not for amateurs. But if we had been professionals, I believe we should have gone at it from the other end. The Robert end. We've been wondering about Mark and Cayley all the time. Now let's wonder about Robert for a bit. We know so little about him. Well, let's see what we do know. First of all, then, we know, vaguely, that he was a bad lot. The sort of brother who is hushed up in front of other people. Yes, we know that he announced his approaching arrival to Mark in a rather unpleasant letter, which I have in my pocket. Yes, and then we know rather a curious thing. We know that Mark told you all that this black sheep was coming. Now, why did he tell you? Bill was thoughtful for a moment. I suppose, he said slowly, that he knew we were bound to see him and thought that the best way was to be quite frank about him. But were you bound to see him? You were all away playing golf. We were bound to see him if he stayed in the house that night. Very well, then. That's one thing we've discovered. Mark knew that Robert was staying in the house that night. Or shall we put it this way? He knew that there was no chance of getting Robert out of the house at once. Bill looked at his friend eagerly. Go on, he said. This is getting interesting. He also knew something else, went on. Antony. He knew that Robert was bound to betray his real character to you as soon as you met him. He couldn't pass him off on you as just a traveled brother from the Dominions, with perhaps a bit of an accent. He had to tell you at once, because you were bound to find out that Robert was a wastrel. Yes, that's sound enough. Well, now, doesn't it strike you that Mark made up his mind about all that rather quickly? What do you mean? He got this letter at breakfast. He read it, and directly he had read it, he began to confide in you all. That is to say, in about 1 second he thought out the whole business and came to two decisions. He considered the possibility of getting Robert out of the way before you came back, and decided that it was impossible. He considered the possibility of Robert's behaving like an ordinary decent person in public, and decided that it was very unlikely. He came to those two decisions instantaneously as he was reading the letter. Isn't that rather quick work? Well, what's the explanation? Antony waited until he had refilled and lighted his pipe before answering. What's the explanation? Well, let's leave it for a moment and take another look at the two brothers. In conjunction, this time with Mrs. Norbury. Mrs. Norbury, said Bill, surprised. Yes, Mark hoped to marry Miss Norbury. Now, if Robert really was a blot upon the family honor, Mark would want to do one of two things. Either keep it from the Norburys altogether, or else, if it had to come out, tell them himself before the news came to them indirectly. Well, he told them. But the funny thing is that he told them the day before Robert's letter came. Robert came and was killed the day before yesterday, Tuesday. Mark told Mrs. Norbury about him on Monday. What do you make of that? Coincidence, said Bill, after careful thought. He'd always meant to tell her. His suit was prospering, and just before it was finally settled, he told her. That happened to be Monday. On Tuesday, he got Robert's letter and felt jolly glad that he'd told her in time. Well, it might be that, but it's rather a curious coincidence. And here is something which makes it very curious indeed. It only occurred to me in the bath this morning. Inspiring place, a bathroom. Well, it's this, he told her on Monday morning, on his way to Middleston in the car. Well, sorry, Tony. I'm dense this morning. In the car, Bill. And how near can the car get to? Jallands? About 600 yards. Yes. And on his way to Middleston, on some business or other, Mark stops the car, walks 600 yards down the hill to Jallands, says, oh, by the way, Mrs. Norbury, I don't think I ever told you that I have a shady brother called Robert, walks 600 yards up the hill again, gets into the car, and goes off to Middleston. Is that likely? Bill frowned heavily. Yes, but I don't see what you're getting at. Likely or not likely, we know he did do it. Of course he did. All I mean is that he must have had some strong reason for telling Mrs. Norbury at once. And the reason I suggest is that he knew on that morning, Monday morning, not Tuesday, that Robert was coming to see him and had to be in first with the news. And that would explain the other point, his instantaneous decision at breakfast to tell you all about his brother. It wasn't instantaneous. He knew on Monday that Robert was coming and decided then that you would all have to know. Then how do you explain the letter? Well, let's have a look at it. Antony took the letter from his pocket and spread it out on the grass between them. Mark, your loving brother is coming to see you tomorrow, all the way from Australia. I give you warning so that you will be able to conceal your surprise, but not, I hope, your pleasure. Expect him at 3 or thereabouts. No date mentioned, you see, said Antony. Just tomorrow. But he got this on Tuesday. Did he? Well, he read it out to us on Tuesday. Oh, yes. He read it out to you. Bill read the letter again, and then turned it over and looked at the back of it. The back of it had nothing to say to him. What about the postmark, he asked. We haven't got the envelope, unfortunately. And you think that he got this letter on Monday? I'm inclined to think so, Bill. Anyhow, I feel almost certain that he knew on Monday that his brother was coming. Is that going to help us much? No. It makes it more difficult. There's something rather uncanny about it all. I don't understand it. He was silent for a little, and then added, I wonder if the inquest is going to help us. What about last night? I'm longing to hear what you make of that. Have you been thinking it out at all? Last night, said Antony thoughtfully to himself. Yes, last night wants some explaining. Bill waited hopefully for him to explain. What, for instance, had Antony been looking for in the cupboard? I think, began Antony slowly, that after last night we must give up the idea that Mark has been killed. Killed, I mean, by Cayley. I don't believe anybody would go to so much trouble to hide a suit of clothes when he had a body on his hands. The body would seem so much more important. I think we may take it now that the clothes are all that Cayley had to hide. But why not kept them in the passage? He was frightened of the passage. Miss Norris knew about it. Well then, in his own bedroom, or even in Mark's. For all you or I or anybody knew, Mark might have had 2 brown suits. He probably had, I should think. Probably. But I doubt if that would reassure Cayley. The brown suit hid a secret, and therefore the brown suit had to be hidden. We all know that in theory the safest hiding place is the most obvious, but in practice very few people have the nerve to risk it. Bill looked rather disappointed. Then we just come back to where we were, he complained. Mark killed his brother, and Cayley helped him to escape through the passage, either in order to compromise him, or because there was no other way out of it. And he helped him by telling a lie about his brown suit. Antony smiled at him in genuine amusement. Bad luck, Bill, he said sympathetically. There's only one murder. After all, I'm awfully sorry about it. It was my fault for shut up, you ass. You know, I didn't mean that. Well, you seemed awfully disappointed. Bill said nothing for a little, and then, with a sudden laugh, confessed. It was so exciting yesterday, he said apologetically, and we seem to be just getting there and discovering the most wonderful things and now. Well, it's so much more ordinary. Antony gave a shout of laughter. Ordinary, he cried. Ordinary. Well, I'm dashed. Ordinary. If only one thing would happen in an ordinary way, we might do something, but everything is ridiculous. Bill brightened up again. Ridiculous? How? Every way. Take those ridiculous clothes we found last night. You can explain the brown suit, but why the underclothes? You can explain the underclothes in some absurd way. If you like, you can say that Mark always changed his underclothes whenever he interviewed anybody from Australia, but why in that case, my dear Watson, why didn't he change his collar? His collar, said Bill in amazement. His collar, Watson. I don't understand. And it's all so ordinary, scoffed Antony. Sorry, Tony, I didn't mean that. Tell me about the collar. Well, that's all. There was no collar in the bag last night. Shirt, socks, tie. Everything except the collar. What? Was that what you were looking for in the cupboard? Said Bill eagerly. Of course. Why no collar? I said, for some reason, Cayley considered it necessary to hide all Mark's clothes. Not just the suit, but everything which he was wearing or supposed to be wearing at the time of the murder. But he hadn't hidden the collar. Why? Had he left it out? By mistake? So I looked in the cupboard. It wasn't there. Had he left it out on purpose? If so, why? And where was it? Naturally, I began to say to myself, where have I seen a collar lately? A collar all by itself. And I remembered, what Bill? Bill frowned heavily to himself and shook his head. Don't ask me, Tony. I can't, by Jove. He threw up his head. In the basket in the office bedroom. Exactly. But is that the one? The one that goes with the rest of the clothes? I don't know. Where else can it be? But if so, Why send the collar quite casually to the wash in the ordinary way, and take immense trouble to hide everything else? Why? Bill bit hard at his pipe, but could think of nothing to say. Anyhow, said Antony, getting up restlessly, I'm certain of one thing. Mark knew on the Monday that Robert was coming here. Chapter 90. The Inquest. The coroner, having made a few commonplace remarks as to the terrible nature of the tragedy which they had come to investigate that afternoon, proceeded to outline the case to the jury. Witnesses would be called to identify the deceased as Robert Ablett, the brother of the owner of the Red House, Mark Ablett. It would be shown that he was something of an ne'er-do-well who had spent most of his life in Australia, and that he had announced, in what might almost be called a threatening letter, his intention of visiting his brother that afternoon. There would be evidence of his arrival, of his being shown into the scene of the tragedy, a room in the Red House, commonly called the office, and of his brother's entrance into that room. The jury would have to form their own opinion as to what happened there. But whatever happened almost instantaneously. Within 2 minutes of Mark Ablett's entrance, as would be shown in the evidence, a shot was heard, and when, perhaps 5 minutes later, the room was forced open, the dead body of Robert Ablett was found stretched upon the floor. As regards Mark Ablett, nobody had seen him from the moment of his going into the room, but evidence would be called to show that he had enough money on him at the time to take him to any other part of the country, and that a man answering to his description had been observed on the platform of Stanton Station, apparently waiting to catch the 3.55 up train to London. As the jury would realize, such evidence of identity was not always reliable. Missing men had a way of being seen in a dozen different places at once. In any case, there was no doubt that for the moment Mark Ablett had disappeared. Seems a sound man, whispered Antony to Bill. Doesn't talk too much. Antony did not expect to learn much from the evidence. He knew the facts of the case so well by now, but he wondered if Inspector Birch had developed any new theories. If so, they would appear in the coroner's examination, for the coroner would certainly have been coached by the police as to the important facts to be extracted from each witness. Bill was the first to be put through it. Now, about this letter, Mr. Beverley, he was asked when his chief evidence was over. Did you see it at all? I didn't see the actual writing. I saw the back of it. Mark was holding it up when he told us about his brother. You don't know what was in it, then? Bill had a sudden shock. He had read the letter only that morning. He knew quite well what was in it, but it wouldn't do to admit this. And then, just as he was about to perjure himself, he remembered. Antony had heard Cayley telling the inspector. I knew afterwards. I was told, but Mark didn't read it out at breakfast. You gathered, however, that it was an unwelcome letter? Oh, yes. Would you say that Mark was frightened by it? Not frightened. Sort of bitter and resigned. Sort of, oh, Lord, here we are again. There was a titter here and there. The coroner smiled and tried to pretend that he hadn't. Thank you, Mr. Beverley. The next witness was summoned, by the name of Andrew Amos, and Antony looked up with interest, wondering who he was. He lives at the Inner Lodge, whispered Bill to him. All that Amos had to say was that a stranger had passed by his lodge at a little before 3 that afternoon and had spoken to him. He had seen the body and recognized it as the man. What did he say? Is this right for the Red House? Or something like that, sir. What did you say? I said, this is the Red House. Who do you want to see? He was a bit rough-looking, you know, sir, and I didn't know what he was doing there. Well, sir, he said, is Mr. Mark Ablett at home? It doesn't sound much put like that, sir, but I didn't care about the way he said it. So I got in front of him and said, what do you want? And he gave sort of chuckle and said, I want to see my dear brother Mark. Well, then I took a closer look at him, and I see that perhaps he might be his brother. So I said, if you'll follow the drive, sir, you'll come to the house. Of course I can't say if Mr. Ablett's at home. And he gave a sort of nasty laugh again, and said, fine place Mr. Mark Ablett's got here. Plenty of money to spend. Well, then I had another look at him, sir, because gentlemen don't talk like that. And if he was Mr. Ablett's brother, but before I could make up my mind, he laughed and went on. That's all I can tell you, sir. Andrew Amos stepped down and moved away to the back of the room, nor did Antony take his eyes off him until he was assured that Amos intended to remain there until the inquest was over. "Who's Amos talking to now?" he whispered to Bill. "Parsons, one of the gardeners. He's at the outside lodge on the Stanton Road. They're all here today. Sort of holiday for him. I wonder if he's giving evidence too," thought Anthony. He followed Amos. He had been at work on the lawn in front of the house and had seen Robert Ablett arrive. He didn't hear the shot, not to notice. He was a little hard of hearing. He had seen a gentleman arrive about 5 minutes after Mr. Robert. "Can you see him in court now?" asked the coroner. Parsons looked round slowly. Anthony caught his eye and smiled. "That's him," said Parsons, pointing. Everybody looked at Anthony. "That was about 5 minutes afterwards." "About that, sir. Did anybody come out of the house before this gentleman's arrival?" "No, sir. That is to say, I didn't see him." Stevens followed. She gave her evidence much as she had given it to the inspector. Nothing new was brought out by her examination. Then came Elsie. As the reporters scribbled down what she had overheard, they added in brackets "sensation" for the first time that afternoon. "How soon after you had heard this did the shot come?" asked the coroner. "Almost at once, sir. A minute. I couldn't really say, sir. It was so quick." "Were you still in the hall?" "Oh, no, sir. I was just outside Mrs. Stevens' room." "The housekeeper, sir. You didn't think of going back to the hall to see what had happened?" "Oh, no, sir. I just went into Mrs. Stevens, and she said, 'Oh, what was that?' frightened like. And I said, 'That was in the house, Mrs. Stevens, that was just like something going off, it was.'" "Thank you," said the coroner. There was another emotional disturbance in the room as Cayley went into the witness box. Not sensation this time, but an eager and, as it seemed to Anthony, sympathetic interest. Now, they were getting to grips with the drama. He gave his evidence carefully, unemotionally, the lies with the same slow deliberation as the truth. Anthony watched him intently, wondering what it was about him which had this odd sort of attractiveness. For Anthony, who knew that he was lying, and lying, as he believed, not for Mark's sake, but his own, yet could not help sharing some of that general sympathy with him. "Was Mark ever in possession of a revolver?" asked the coroner. "Not to my knowledge. I think I should have known if he had been." "You were alone with him all that morning. Did he talk about this visit of Robert's at all?" "I didn't see very much of him in the morning. I was at work in my room and outside and so on. We lunched together, and he talked of it then a little." "In what terms?" "Well," he hesitated and then went on. "I can't think of a better word than peevishly. Occasionally he said, 'What do you think he wants?' Or 'Why couldn't he have stayed where he was?' Or 'I don't like the tone of his letter. Do you think he means trouble?' He talked rather in that kind of way." "Did he express his surprise that his brother should be in England?" "I think he was always afraid that he would turn up one day." "Yes." "You didn't hear any conversation between the brothers when they were in the office together?" "No. I happened to go into the library just after Mark had gone in, and I was there all the time." "Was the library door open?" "Oh, yes." "Did you see or hear the last witness at all?" "No." "If anybody had come out of the office while you were in the library, would you have heard it?" "I think so, unless they had come out very quietly on purpose." "Would you call Mark a hasty-tempered man?" Cayley considered this carefully before answering. "Hasty-tempered, yes," he said, "but not violent-tempered." "Was he fairly athletic?" "Active and quick." "Active and quick, yes." "Not particularly strong." "Yes." "One question more. Was Mark in the habit of carrying any considerable sum of money about with him?" "Yes. He always had one 100-pound note on him, and perhaps 10 or 20 pounds as well." "Thank you, Mr. Cayley." Cayley went back heavily to his seat. "Damn it," said Anthony to himself. "Why do I like the fellow? Anthony Gillingham." Again the eager interest of the room could be felt. Who was this stranger who had got mixed up in the business so mysteriously? Anthony smiled at Bill and stepped up to give his evidence. He explained how he came to be staying at the George at Woodham, how he had heard that the Red House was in the neighborhood, how he had walked over to see his friend Beverley, and had arrived just after the tragedy. Thinking it over afterwards, he was fairly certain that he had heard the shot, but it had not made any impression on him at the time. He had come to the house from the Woodham end, and consequently had seen nothing of Robert Ablett, who had been a few minutes in front of him. From this point, his evidence coincided with Cayley's. You and the last witness reached the French windows together and found them shut? Yes. You pushed them in and came to the body. Of course you had no idea whose body it was. No. Did Mr. Cayley say anything? He turned the body over just so as to see the face, and when he saw it, he said, "Thank God." Again, the reporters wrote sensation. Did you understand what he meant by that? I asked him who it was, and he said that it was Robert Ablett. Then he explained that he was afraid at first it was the cousin with whom he lived, Mark. Yes. Did he seem upset? Very much so at first, less when he found that it wasn't Mark. There was a sudden snigger from a nervous gentleman in the crowd at the back of the room, and the coroner put on his glasses and stared sternly in the direction from which it came. The nervous gentleman hastily decided that the time had come to do up his bootlace. The coroner put down his glasses and continued. Did anybody come out of the house while you were coming up the drive? No, thank you, Mr. Gillingham. He was followed by Inspector Birch. The inspector, realizing that this was his afternoon and that the eyes of the world were upon him, produced a plan of the house and explained the situation of the different rooms. The plan was then handed to the jury. Inspector Birch, so he told the world, had arrived at the Red House at 4:42 p.m. on the afternoon in question. He had been received by Mr. Matthew Cayley, who had made a short statement to him, and he had then proceeded to examine the scene of the crime. The French windows had been forced from outside. The door leading into the hall was locked. He had searched the room thoroughly and had found no trace of a key. In the bedroom leading out of the office, he had found an open window. There were no marks on the window, but it was a low one, and, as he found from experiment, quite easy to step out of without touching it with the boots. A few yards outside the window, a shrubbery began. There were no recent footmarks outside the window, but the ground was in a very hard condition owing to the absence of rain. In the shrubbery, however, he found several twigs on the ground, recently broken off, together with other evidence that some body had been forcing its way through. He had questioned everybody connected with the estate, and none of them had been into the shrubbery recently. By forcing a way through the shrubbery, it was possible for a person to make a detour of the house and get to the Stanton end of the park without ever being in sight of the house itself. He had made inquiries about the deceased. The deceased had left for Australia some 15 years ago, owing to some financial trouble at home. Deceased was not well spoken of in the village from which he and his brother had come. Deceased and his brother had never been on good terms, and the fact that Mark Ablett had come into money had been a cause of great bitterness between them. It was shortly after this that Robert had left for Australia. He had made inquiries at Stanton Station. It had been market day at Stanton, and the station had been more full of arrivals than usual. Nobody had particularly noticed the arrival of Robert Ablett. There had been a good many passengers by the 2.10 train that afternoon, the train by which Robert had undoubtedly come from London. A witness, however, would state that he noticed a man resembling Mark Ablett at the station at 3:53 p.m. that afternoon, and this man caught the 3.5 up train town. There was a pond in the grounds of the Red House. He had dragged this, but without result. Anthony listened to him carelessly, thinking his own thoughts all the time. Medical evidence followed, but there was nothing to be got from that. He felt so close to the truth, at any moment something might give his brain the one little hint which it wanted. Inspector Birch was just pursuing the ordinary. Whatever else this case was, it was not ordinary. There was something uncanny about it. John Borden was giving evidence. He was on the up platform, seeing a friend off by the 3.55 on Tuesday afternoon. He had noticed a man on the platform with coat collar turned up and a scarf around his chin. He had wondered why the man should do this on such a hot day. The man seemed to be trying to escape observation. Directly the train came in, he hurried into a carriage. And so on. There's always a John Borden at every murder case, said Anthony to himself. Have you ever seen Mark Ablett? Once or twice, sir. Was it he? I never really got a good look at him, sir. What with his collar, turn up, and the scarf and all. But directly I heard of the sad affair, and that Mr. Ablett was missing, I said to Mrs. Borden, now I wonder if that was Mr. Ablett I saw at the station. So then we talked it over and decided that I ought to come and tell Inspector Birch. It was just Mr. Ablett's height, sir. And he went on with his thoughts. The coroner was summing up. The jury, he said, had now heard all the evidence and would have to decide what had happened in that room between the two brothers. How had the deceased met his death? The medical evidence would probably satisfy them that Robert Ablett had died from the effects of a bullet wound in the head. Who had fired that bullet? If Robert Ablett had fired it himself, no doubt they would bring in a verdict of suicide. But if this had been so, where was the revolver which had fired it? And what had become of Mark Ablett? If they disbelieved in this possibility of suicide, what remained? Accidental death, justifiable homicide, and murder. Could the deceased have been killed accidentally? It was possible, but then would Mark Ablett have run away? The evidence that he had run away from the scene of the crime was strong. His cousin had seen him go into the room. The servant Elsie would had heard him quarreling with his brother in the room. The door had been locked from the inside, and there were signs that outside the open window someone had pushed his way very recently through the shrubbery. Who, if not Mark? They would have then to consider whether he would have run away if he had been guiltless of his brother's death. No doubt innocent people lost their heads sometimes. It was possible that if it were proved afterwards that Mark Ablett had shot his brother, it might also be proved that he was justified in so doing, and that when he ran away from his brother's corpse, he had really nothing to fear at the hands of the law. In this connection, he need hardly remind the jury that they were not the final tribunal, and that if they found Mark Ablett guilty of murder, it would not prejudice his trial in any way if and when he was apprehended. The jury could consider their verdict. They considered it. They announced that the deceased had died as the result of a bullet wound, and that the bullet had been fired by his brother Mark Ablett. Bill turned round to Antony at his side, but Antony was gone. Across the room, he saw Andrew Amos and Parsons going out of the door together, and Antony was between them. Chapter 20. Mr. Beverley is Tactful. The inquest had been held at the Lamb at Stanton. At Stanton, Robert Ablett was to be buried next day. Bill waited about outside for his friend, wondering where he had gone. Then, realizing that Cayley would be coming out to his car directly, and that a farewell talk with Cayley would be a little embarrassing, he wandered round to the yard at the back of the inn, lit a cigarette, and stood surveying a torn and weather-beaten poster on the stable wall. Grand theatrical enter, it announced, to take place on Wednesday decem. Bill smiled to himself as he looked at it. For the part of Joe, a loquacious postman, had been played by William B. Beverley, as the remnants of the poster still maintained, and he had been much less loquacious than the author had intended, having forgotten his words completely, but it had all been great fun. And then he stopped smiling, for there would be no more fun now at the Red House. "Sorry to keep you waiting," said the voice of Antony behind him. "My old friends Amos and Parsons insisted on giving me a drink." He slipped his hand into the crook of Bill's arm and smiled happily at him. "Why were you so keen about them?" asked Bill a little resentfully. "I couldn't think where on earth you had got to." Antony didn't say anything. He was staring at the poster. "When did this happen?" he asked. "What?" Antony waved to the poster. "Oh, that? Last Christmas. It was rather fun." Antony began to laugh to himself. "Were you good?" "Rotten. I don't profess to be an actor." "Mark good." "Oh, rather. He loves it." Reverend Henry Stutters. Mr. Matthew K. read Antony. "Was that our friend Cayley?" "Yes." "Any good?" "Well, much better than I expected. He wasn't keen, but Mark made him." "Miss Norris wasn't playing, I see." "My dear Tony, she's a professional." "Of course she wasn't." Antony laughed again. "A great success, was it?" "Oh, rather. I'm a fool, and a damned fool," Antony announced solemnly. "And a damned fool," he said again under his breath, as he led Bill away from the poster and out of the yard into the road. "And a damned fool. Even now," he broke off and then asked suddenly, "did Mark ever have much trouble with his teeth?" "He went to his dentist a good deal." "But what on earth?" Antony laughed a third time. "What luck," he chuckled. "But how do you know?" "We go to the same man. Mark recommended him to me." "Cartwright in Wimpole Street." "Cartwright in Wimpole Street," repeated Antony thoughtfully. "Yes, I can remember that. Cartwright in Wimpole Street. Did Cayley go to him too, by any chance?" "I expect so." "Oh, yes, I know he did. But what on earth? What was Mark's general health like? Did he see a doctor much?" "Hardly at all, I should think. He did a lot of early morning exercises." which were supposed to make him bright and cheerful at breakfast. They didn't do that, but they seemed to keep him pretty fit. "Tony, I wish you'd—" Anthony held up a hand and hushed him into silence. "One last question," he said. "Was Mart fond of swimming?" "No, he hated it. I don't believe he could swim." "Tony, are you mad or am I? Or is this a new game?" Anthony squeezed his arm. "Dear old Bill," he said, "it's a game." "What a game?" "And the answer is Cartwright in Wimpole Street." They walked in silence for half a mile or so along the road to Woodham. Bill tried 2 or 3 times to get his friend to talk, but Anthony had only grunted in reply. He was just going to make another attempt when Anthony came to a sudden stop and turned to him anxiously. "I wonder if you'd do something for me," he said, looking at him with some doubt. "What sort of thing?" "Well, it's really dashed important. It's just the one thing I want now." Bill was suddenly enthusiastic again. "I say, have you really found it all out?" Anthony nodded. "At least, I'm very nearly there, Bill. There's just this one thing I want now. It means you're going back to Stanton." "Well, we haven't come far. It won't take you long. Do you mind?" "My dear Holmes, I am at your service." Anthony gave him a smile and was silent for a little, thinking, "Is there another inn at Stanton, fairly close to the station?" "The Plough and Horses, just at the corner where the road goes up to the station. Is that the one you mean?" "That would be the one. I suppose you could do with a drink, couldn't you?" "Rather," said Bill, with a grin. "Good. Then have one at the Plough and Horses. Have 2, if you like, and talk to the landlord or landlady or whoever serves you. I wanted to find out if anybody stayed there on Monday night." "Robert," said Bill eagerly. "I didn't say Robert," said Anthony, smiling. "I just wanted to find out if they had a visitor who slept there on Monday night. A stranger. If so, then any particulars you can get of him, without letting the landlord know that you are interested. Leave it to me, Broken Bill. I know just what you want. Don't assume that it was Robert or anybody else. Let them describe the man to you. Don't influence them unconsciously by suggesting that he was short or tall or anything of that sort. Just get them talking. If it's the landlord, you'd better stand him a drink or 2. "Right you are," said Bill confidently. "Where do I meet you again?" "Probably at the George. If you get there before me, you can order dinner for 8 o'clock. Anyhow, we'll meet at 8, if not before." "Good." He nodded to Anthony and strode off back to Stanton again. Anthony stood watching him with a little smile at his enthusiasm. Then he looked round slowly, as if in search of something. Suddenly he saw what he wanted. 20 yards farther on a lane wandered off to the left, and there was a gate a little way up on the right-hand side of it. Anthony walked to the gate, filling his pipe as he went. Then he lit his pipe, sat on the gate, and took his head in his hands. "Now then," he said to himself, "let's begin at the beginning." It was nearly 8 o'clock when William Beverley, the famous sleuth hound, arrived, tired and dusty, at the George to find Anthony, cool and clean, standing bareheaded at the door, waiting for him. "Is dinner ready?" were Bill's first words. "Yes." "Then I'll just have a wash. Lord, I'm tired. I never ought to have asked you," said Anthony penitently. "That's all right. Primishan beamumin." Halfway up the stairs, he turned round and asked, "Am I in your room?" "Yes." "Do you know the way?" "Yes." "Start carving, will you? And order lots of beer." He disappeared round the top of the staircase. Anthony went slowly in. When the first edge of his appetite had worn off, and he was able to spare a little time between the mouthfuls, Bill gave an account of his adventures. The landlord of the Plough and Horses had been sticky, decidedly sticky. Bill had been unable at first to get anything out of him. But Bill had been tactful. Lord bless you, how tactful he had been. He kept on about the inquest and what a queer affair it had been, and so on, and how there'd been an inquest in his wife's family once, which he seemed rather proud about. And I kept saying, "Pretty busy, I suppose, just now." And then he'd say, "Midland," and go on again about Susan. That was the one that had the inquest. He talked about it as if it were a disease. And then I'd try again and say, "Slack times, I expect, just now." And he'd say Midland again, and then it was time to offer him another drink, and I didn't seem to be getting much nearer. But I got him at last. I asked him if he knew John Borden. He was the man who said he'd seen Mark at the station. Well, he knew all about Borden, and after he'd told me all about Borden's wife's family, and how one of them had been burnt to death. "After you with beer." "Thanks, Well, then I said carelessly that it must be very hard to remember anybody whom you had just seen once, so as to identify him afterwards, and he agreed that it would be middling hard. And then, "Give me 3 guesses," interrupted Antony. "You asked him if he remembered everybody who came to his inn." "That's it. Bright, wasn't it? Brilliant. And what was the result?" "The result was a woman." "A woman," said Antony eagerly. "A woman," said Bill impressively. "Of course I thought it was going to be Robert. So did you, didn't you?" But it wasn't. It was a woman. Came quite late on Monday night in a car. Driving herself, went off early next morning. Did he describe her? Yes. She was middling. Middling tall, middling age, middling color, and so on. Doesn't help much, does it? But still a woman. Does that upset your theory? Antony shook his head. "No, Bill, not at all," he said. "You knew all the time? At least you guessed." "Wait till tomorrow. I'll tell you. Everything tomorrow." "Tomorrow," said Bill in great disappointment. "Well, I'll tell you one thing tonight, if you'll promise not to ask any more questions. But you probably know it already." "What is it?" "Only that Mark Ablett did not kill his brother." "And Cayley did?" "That's another question, Bill. However, the answer is that Cayley didn't, either." "Then who on earth—" "Have some more beer," said Antony with a smile. And Bill had to be content with that. They were early to bed that evening, for both of them were tired. Bill slept loudly and defiantly, but Antony lay awake, wondering what was happening at the Red House now. Perhaps he would hear in the morning. Perhaps he would get a letter. He went over the whole story again from the beginning. Was there any possibility of a mistake? What would the police do? Would they ever find out? Ought he to have told them? Well, let them find out. It was their job. Surely he couldn't have made a mistake this time. No good wondering. Now, he would know definitely in the morning. In the morning there was a letter for him. Chapter 21. Cayley's apology. My dear Mr. Gillingham, I gather from your letter that you have made certain discoveries which you may feel it your duty to communicate to the police, and that in this case my arrest on a charge of murder would inevitably follow. Why, in these circumstances, you should give me such ample warning of your intentions, I do not understand, unless it is that you are not wholly out of sympathy with me. But whether or not you sympathize, at any rate you will want to know, and I want you to know, the exact manner in which Ablett met his death and the reasons which made that death necessary. If the police have to be told anything, I would rather that they too knew the whole story. They, and even you, may call it murder, but by that time I shall be out of the way. Let them call it what they like. I must begin by taking you back to a summer day 15 years ago, when I was a boy of 13 and Mark a young man of 25. His whole life was make-believe, and just now he was pretending to be a philanthropist. He sat in our little drawing room, flicking his gloves against the back of his left hand, and my mother, good soul, thought what a noble young gentleman he was, and Philip and I, hastily washed and crammed into collars, stood in front of him, nudging each other and kicking the backs of our heels and cursing him in our hearts for having interrupted our game. He had decided to adopt one of us, kind cousin Mark. Heaven knows why he chose me. Philip was 11, 2 years longer to wait. Perhaps that was why. Well, Mark educated me. I went to a public school and to Cambridge, and I became his secretary. Well, much more than his secretary, as your friend Beverley perhaps has told you. His land agent, his financial advisor, his courier, but this most of all, his audience. Mark could never live alone. There must always be somebody to listen to him. I think in his heart he hoped I should be his Boswell. He told me one day that he had made me his literary executor. Poor devil. And he used to write me the absurdest long letters when I was away from him, letters which I read once and then tore up. The futility of the man. It was 3 years ago that Philip got into trouble. He had been hurried through a cheap grammar school and into a London office, and discovered there that there was not much fun to be got in this world on £2 a week. I had a frantic letter from him one day, saying that he must have 100 at once, or he would be ruined, and I went to Mark for the money. Only to borrow it, you understand. He gave me a good salary, and I could have paid it back in 3 months. But no, he saw nothing for himself in it. I suppose, no applause, no admiration. Philip's gratitude would be to me, not to him. I begged, I threatened, we argued. And while we were arguing, Philip was arrested. It killed my mother. He was always her favorite, but Mark, as usual, got his satisfaction out of it. He preened himself on his judgment of character in having chosen me, and not Philip 12 years before. Later on I apologized to Mark for the reckless things I'd said to him, and he played the part of a magnanimous gentleman with his accustomed skill. But, though outwardly we were as before to each other, from that day forward, though his vanity would never let him see it, I was his bitterest enemy. If that had been all, I wonder if I should have killed him? To live on terms of intimate friendship with a man whom you hate is dangerous work for your friend. Because of his belief in me as his admiring and grateful protege, and his belief in himself as my benefactor, he was now utterly in my power. I could take my time and choose my opportunity. Perhaps I should not have killed him, but I had sworn to have my revenge, and there he was, poor vain fool, at my mercy. I was in no hurry. 2 years. Later I had to reconsider my position, for my revenge was being taken out of my hands. Mark began to drink. Could I have stopped him? I don't think so, but to my immense surprise I found myself trying to. Instinct, perhaps, getting the better of reason. Or did I reason it out and tell myself that, if he drank himself to death, I should lose my revenge? Upon my word, I cannot tell you. But, for whatever motive, I did genuinely want to stop it. Drinking is such a beastly thing, anyhow. I could not stop him, but I kept him within certain bounds, so that nobody but myself knew his secret. Yes, I kept him outwardly decent, and perhaps now I was becoming like the cannibal who keeps his victim in good condition for his own ends. I used to gloat over Mark, thinking how utterly he was mine to ruin as I pleased, financially, morally, whatever way would give me most satisfaction. I had but to take my hand away from him, and he sank. But again I was in no hurry. Then he killed himself. That futile little drunkard, eaten up with his own selfishness and vanity, offered his beastliness to the truest and purest woman on this earth. You have seen her, Mr. Gillingham, but you never knew Mark Ablett. Even if he had not been a drunkard, there was no chance for her of happiness with him. I had known him for many years, but never once had I seen him moved by any generous emotion. To have lived with that shriveled little soul would have been hell for her, and 1,000 times worse hell. When he began to drink, so he had to be killed. I was the only one left to protect her, for her mother was in league with Mark to bring about her ruin. I would have shot him openly for her sake, and with what gladness, but I had no mind to sacrifice myself needlessly. He was in my power. I could persuade him to almost anything by flattery. Surely it would not be difficult to give his death the appearance of an accident. I need not take up your time by telling you of the many plans I made and rejected. For some days I inclined towards an unfortunate boating accident in the pond. Mark, a very indifferent swimmer, myself almost exhausted in a gallant attempt to hold him up. And then he himself gave me the idea, he and Miss Norris between them, and so put himself in my hands. Without risk of discovery, I should have said, had you not discovered me. We were talking about ghosts. Mark had been even more vain, pompous, and absurd than usual, and I could see that Miss Norris was irritated by it. After dinner, she suggested dressing up as a ghost and frightening him. I thought it my duty to warn her that Mark took any joke against himself badly, but she was determined to do it. I gave way reluctantly. Also, I told her the secret of the passage. There is an underground passage from the library to the bowling green. You should exercise your ingenuity, Mr. Gillingham, in trying to discover it. Mark came upon it by accident a year ago. It was a godsend to him. He could drink there in greater secrecy, but he had to tell me about it. He wanted an audience, even for his vices. I told Miss Norris, then, because it was necessary for my plan that Mark should be thoroughly frightened. Without the passage, she could never have got close enough to the bowling green to alarm him properly. But as I arranged it with her, she made the most effective appearance, and Mark was in just the state of rage and vindictiveness which I required. Miss Norris, you understand, is a professional actress. I need not say that to her I appear to be animated by no other feeling than a boyish desire to bring off a good joke, a joke directed as much against the others as against Mark. He came to me that night, as I expected, still quivering with indignation. Miss Norris must never be asked to the house again. I was to make a special note of it. Never again. It was outrageous. Had he not a reputation as a host to keep up, he would pack her off next morning. As it was, she could stay. Hospitality demanded it. But never again would she come to the Red House. He was absolutely determined about that. I was to make a special note of it. I comforted him. I smoothed down his ruffled feathers. She had behaved very badly, but he was quite right. He must try not to show how much he disapproved of her. And of course she would never come again. That was obvious. And then suddenly I began to laugh. He looked up at me indignantly. "Is there a joke?" he said coldly. I laughed gently. "Again, I was just thinking," I said, "that it would be rather amusing if you, well, had your revenge." "My revenge? How do you mean?" "Well, paid her back in her own coin." "Do you mean try and frighten her?" No, but dressed up and pulled her leg a bit. Made her look a fool in front of the others." I laughed to myself again. Serve her jolly well right. He jumped up excitedly. "By Jove, Kay," he cried. "If I could." "How?" "You must think of a way. I don't know if Beverley is told you about Mark's acting. He was an amateur of all the arts and vain of his little talents. But as an actor he seemed to himself most wonderful. Certainly he had some ability for the stage, so long as he had the stage to himself and was playing to an admiring audience. As a professional actor in a small part, he would have been hopeless. As an amateur playing the leading part, he deserved all that the local papers had ever said about him. And so the idea of giving us a private performance, directed against a professional actress who had made fun of him, appealed equally to his vanity and his desire for retaliation. If he, Mark Ablett, by his wonderful acting could make Ruth Norris look a fool in front of the others, could take her in, and then join in the laugh at her afterwards, he would indeed have had a worthy revenge. It strikes you as childish, Mr. Gillingham? Ah, you never knew Mark Ablett. How, Kay, how? He said eagerly. Well, I haven't really thought it out, I protested. It was just an idea. He began to think it out for himself. I might pretend to be a manager, come down to see her, but I suppose she knows them all. What about an interviewer? It's going to be difficult, I said thoughtfully. You've got rather a characteristic face, you know. And your beard, I'd shave it off, he snapped. My dear Mark. He looked away and mumbled, I've been thinking of taking it off, anyhow. And besides, if I'm going to do the thing, I'm going to do it. Properly. Yes, you always were an artist, I said, looking at him admiringly. He purred. To be called an artist was what he longed for most. Now I knew that I had him. All the same, I went on, even without your beard and mustache you might be recognizable. Unless, of course, I broke off. Unless what? You pretend to be Robert. I began to laugh to myself again. By Jove, I said, that's not a bad idea. Pretend to be Robert, the wastrel brother, and make yourself objectionable too. Miss Norris, borrow money from her, and that sort of thing. He looked at me, with his bright little eyes, nodding eagerly. Robert, he said. Yes. How shall we work it? There was really a Robert, Mr. Gillingham, as I have no doubt you and the inspector both discovered. And he was a wastrel, and he went to Australia. But he never came to the Red House on Tuesday afternoon. He couldn't have because he died, unlamented, 3 years ago. But there was nobody who knew this, save Mark and myself, for Mark was the only one of the family left, his sister having died last year. Though I doubt, anyhow, if she knew whether Robert was alive or dead. He was not talked about. For the next 2 days, Mark and I worked out our plans. You understand by now that our aims were not identical. Mark's endeavor was that his deception should last for, say, a couple of hours. Mine that it should go to the grave with him. He had only to deceive Miss Norris and the other guests. I had to deceive the world. When he was dressed up as Robert, I was going to kill him. Robert would then be dead. Mark, of course, missing. What could anybody think but that Mark had killed Robert? But you see how important it was for Mark to enter fully into his latest and last impersonation. Half measures would be fatal. You will say that it was impossible to do the thing thoroughly enough. I answer again that you never knew Mark. He was being what he wished most to be, an artist. No Othello ever blacked himself all over with such enthusiasm as did Mark. His beard was going anyhow. Possible a chance remark of Miss Norbury's helped here. She did not like beards, but it was important for me that the dead man's hands should not be the hands of a manicured gentleman. 5 minutes playing upon the vanity of the artist settled his hands. He let the nails grow and then cut them raggedly. Miss Norris would notice your hands at once, I had said. Besides, as an artist, so with his underclothes. It was hardly necessary to warn him that his pants might show above the edge of his socks. As an artist, he had already decided upon Robertian pants. I bought them and other things in London for him. Even if I had not cut out all trace of the maker's name, he would instinctively have done it. As an Australian and an artist, he could not have an East London address on his underclothes. Yes, we were doing the thing thoroughly, both of us. He as an artist, I as a, well, you may say murderer if you like. I shall not mind now. Our plans were settled. I went to London on the Monday and wrote him a letter from Robert. The artistic touch again. I also bought a revolver. On the Tuesday morning, he announced the arrival of Robert at the breakfast table. Robert was now alive. We had 6 witnesses to prove it. 6 witnesses who knew that he was coming that afternoon. Our private plan was that Robert should present himself at 3 o'clock, in readiness for the return of the golfing party shortly. Afterwards, the maid would go to look for Mark, and having failed to find him, come back to the office to find me entertaining Robert in Mark's absence. I would explain that Mark must have gone out somewhere, and would myself introduce the wastrel brother to the tea table. Mark's absence would not excite any comment, for it would be generally felt. Indeed, Robert would suggest it, that he had been afraid of meeting his brother. Then Robert would make himself amusingly offensive to the guests, particularly, of course, Miss Norris, until he thought that the joke had gone far enough. That was our private plan. Perhaps I should say that it was Mark's private plan. My own was different. The announcement at breakfast went well. After the golfing party had gone off, we had the morning in which to complete our arrangements. What I was chiefly concerned about was to establish as completely as possible the identity of Robert. For this reason, I suggested to Mark that, when dressed, he should go out by the secret passage to the bowling green and come back by the drive, taking care to enter into conversation with the lodgekeeper. In this way, I would have 2 more witnesses of Robert's arrival. First, the lodgekeeper, and secondly, one of the gardeners whom I would have working on the front lawn. Mark, of course, was willing enough. He could practice his Australian accent on the lodgekeeper. It was really amusing to see how readily he fell into every suggestion which I made. Never was a killing more carefully planned by its victim. He changed into Robert's clothes in the office bedroom. This was the safest way for both of us. When he was ready, he called me in, and I inspected him. It was extraordinary how well he looked the part. I suppose that the signs of his dissipation had already marked themselves on his face, but had been concealed hitherto by his mustache and beard. For now that he was clean-shaven, they lay open to the world from which we had so carefully hidden them. And he was indeed the wastrel which he was pretending to be. "By Jove, you're wonderful," I said. He smirked and called my attention to the various artistic touches which I might have missed. "Wonderful," I said to myself again. Nobody could possibly guess. I peered into the hall. It was empty. We hurried across to the library. He got into the passage and made off. I went back to the bedroom, collected all his discarded clothes, did them up in a bundle, and returned with them to the passage. Then I sat down in the hall and waited. You heard the evidence of Stevens, the maid. As soon as she was on her way to the temple in search of Mark, I stepped into the office. My hand was in my side pocket, and in my hand was the revolver. He began at once in his character of Robert, some rigmarole about working his passage over from Australia, a little private performance for my edification. Then in his natural voice, gloating over his well-planned retaliation on Miss Norris, he burst out, "It's my turn now. You wait." It was this which Elsie heard. She had no business to be there, and she might have ruined everything. But as it turned out, it was the luckiest thing which could have happened. For it was the one piece of evidence which I wanted, evidence other than my own, that Mark and Robert were in the room together. I said nothing. I was not going to take the risk of being heard to speak in that room. I just smiled at the poor little fool and took out my revolver and shot him. Then I went back into the library and waited just as I said in my evidence. Can you imagine, Mr. Gillingham, the shock which your sudden appearance gave me? Can you imagine the feelings of a murderer who has, as he thinks, planned for every possibility and is then confronted suddenly with an utterly new problem? What difference would your coming make? I didn't know. Perhaps none. Perhaps all. And I had forgotten to open the window. I don't know whether you will. Think my plan for killing Mark a clever one? Perhaps not. But if I do deserve any praise in the matter, I think I deserve it for the way I pulled myself together in the face of the unexpected catastrophe of your arrival. Yes, I got a window open, Mr. Gillingham, under your very nose. The right window, too, you were kind enough to say. And the keys. Yes, that was clever of you. But I think I was cleverer. I deceived you over the keys, Mr. Gillingham, as I learnt when I took the liberty of listening to a conversation on the bowling green between you and your friend Beverley. Where was I? Ah, you must have a look for that secret passage, Mr. Gillingham. But what am I saying? Did I deceive you at all? You have found out the secret. That Robert was Mark, and that is all that matters. How have you found out? I shall never know now. Where did I go wrong? Perhaps you have been deceiving me all the time. Perhaps you knew about the keys, about the window, even about the secret passage. You are a clever man, Mr. Gillingham. I had Mark's clothes on my hands. I might have left them in the passage, but the secret of the passage was now out. Miss Norris knew it. That was the weak point of my plan, perhaps, that Miss Norris had to know it. So I hid them in the pond, the inspector having obligingly dragged it from me first. A couple of keys joined them, but I kept the revolver. Fortunate, wasn't it, Mr. Gillingham? I don't think that there is any more to tell you. This is a long letter, but then it is the last which I shall write. There was a time when I hoped that there might be a happy future for me. Not at the Red House, not alone. Perhaps it was never more than an idle daydream, for I am no more worthy of her than Mark was. But I could have made her happy, Mr. Gillingham. God, how I would have worked to make her happy. But now that is impossible. To offer her the hand of a murderer would be as bad as to offer her the hand of a drunkard. And Mark died for that. I saw her this morning. She was very sweet. It is a difficult world to understand. Well, we are all gone now, the Abletts and the Cayleys. I wonder what old grandfather Cayley thinks of it all. Perhaps it is as well that we have died out. Not that there was anything wrong with Sarah, except her temper. And she had the Ablett nose. You can't do much with that. I'm glad she left no children. Goodbye, Mr. Gillingham. I'm sorry that your stay with us was not of a pleasanter nature, but you understand the difficulties in which I was placed. Don't let Bill think too badly of me. He is a good fellow. Look after him. He will be surprised. The young are always surprised. And thank you for letting me in my own way. I expect you did sympathize a little, you know. We might have been friends in another world. You and I and she. Tell her what you like. Everything or nothing. You will know what is best. Goodbye, Mr. Gillingham. Matthew Cayley. I am lonely tonight without Mark. That's funny, isn't it? Chapter 22. Mr. Beverley moves on, good Lord, said Bill, as he put down the letter. I thought you'd say that, murmured Anthony. Tony, do you mean to say that you knew all this? I guess some of it. I didn't quite know all of it, of course. Good Lord, said Bill again, and returned to the letter. In a moment, he was looking up again. What did you write to him? Was that last night? After I'd gone into Stanton? Yes. What did you say? That you'd discovered that Mark was Robert? Yes. At least I said that this morning I should probably telegraph to Mr. Cartwright of Wimpole Street and ask him to... Bill burst in eagerly on the top of the sentence. Yes, now what was all that about? You were so damn Sherlocky yesterday, all of a sudden. We've been doing the thing together all the time, and you've been telling me everything, and then suddenly you become very mysterious and private and talk enigmatically. Is that the word? About dentists and swimming in the plow and horses, and, well, what was it all about? You simply vanished out of sight. I didn't know what on earth we were talking about. Anthony laughed and apologized. Sorry, Bill. I felt like that suddenly. Just for the last half hour. Just to end up with. I'll tell you everything now. Not that there's anything to tell, really. It seems so easy when you know it, so obvious. About Mr. Cartwright of Wimpole Street. Of course, he was just to identify the body. But whatever. Made you think of a dentist for that? Who could do it better? Could you have done it? How could you? You'd never gone bathing with Mark. You'd never seen him stripped. He didn't swim. Could his doctor do it? Not unless he'd had some particular operation, and perhaps not then. But his dentist could, at any time, always, if he had been to his dentist fairly often. Hence Mr. Cartwright of Wimpole Street. Bill nodded thoughtfully and went back again to the letter. I see. And you told Cayley that. You were telegraphing to Cartwright to identify the body. Yes. And then of course it was all up for him. Once we knew that Robert was Mark, we knew everything. How did you know? Anthony got up from the breakfast table and began to fill his pipe. I'm not sure that I can say, Bill. You know those problems in algebra where you say, let X be the answer, and then you work it out and find what X is? Well, that's one way. And another way, which they never give you any marks for at school, is to guess the answer. Pretend the answer is 4. Well, will that satisfy the conditions of the problem? No. Then try 6. And if 6 doesn't either, then what about 5? And so on. Well, the inspector and the coroner and all that lot had guessed their answer, and it seemed to fit, but you and I knew it didn't really fit. There were several conditions in the problem which it didn't fit at all. So we knew that their answer was wrong, and we had to think of another, an answer which explained all the things, which were puzzling us. Well, I happened to guess the right one. Got a match. Bill handed him a box, and he lit his pipe. Yes, but that doesn't quite do, old boy. Something must have put you onto it suddenly. By the way, I'll have my matches back, if you don't mind. Anthony laughed and took them out of his pocket. Sorry. Well then, let's see if I can go through my own mind again and tell you how I guessed it. First of all, the clothes. Yes. To Cayley, the clothes seemed an enormously important clue. I didn't quite see why, but I did realize that to a man in Cayley's position, the smallest clue would have an entirely disproportionate value. For some reason, then, Cayley attached this exaggerated importance to the clothes which Mark was wearing on that Tuesday morning. All the clothes, the inside ones as well as the outside ones. I didn't know why, but I did feel certain that, in that case, the absence of the collar was unintentional. In collecting the clothes, he had overlooked the collar. Why? It was the one in the linen basket. Yes, it seemed probable. Why had Cayley put it there? The obvious answer was that he hadn't. Mark had put it there. I remembered what you told me about Mark being finicky and having lots of clothes and so on, and I felt that he was just the sort of man who would never wear the same collar twice. He paused and then asked, Is that right, do you think? Absolutely, said Bill with conviction. Well, I guessed it was. So then, I began to see an X which would fit just this part of the problem, the clothes part. I saw Mark changing his clothes. I saw him instinctively dropping the collar in the linen basket, just as he had always dropped every collar he had ever taken off, but leaving the rest of the clothes on a chair in the ordinary way. And I saw Cayley collecting all the clothes afterwards, all the visible clothes, and not realizing that the collar wasn't there. Go on, said Bill eagerly. Well, I felt pretty sure about that, and I want an explanation of it. Why had Mark changed down there instead of in his bedroom? The only answer was that the fact of his changing had to be kept secret. When did he change? The only possible time was between lunch, when he would be seen by the servants, and the moment of Robert's arrival. And when did Cayley collect the clothes in a bundle? Again, the only answer was before Robert's arrival. So another X was wanted to fit those 3 conditions. And the answer was that a murder was intended even before Robert arrived. Yes. Well now, it couldn't be intended on the strength of that letter, unless there was very much more behind the letter than we knew. Nor was it possible a murder could be intended without any more preparation than the changing into a different suit in which to escape. The thing was too childish. Also, if Robert was to be murdered, why go out of the way to announce his existence to you all, even at the cost of some trouble, to Mrs. Norbury? What did it all mean? I didn't know, but I began to feel now that Robert was an incident only, that the plot was a plot of Cayley's against Mark, either to get him to kill his brother or to get his brother to kill him, and that for some inexplicable reason Mark seemed to be lending himself to the plot. He was silent for a little, and then said, almost to himself, I had seen the empty brandy bottles in that cupboard. You never said anything about them, complained Bill. I only saw them afterwards. I was looking for the collar, you remember. They came back to me afterwards. I knew how Cayley would feel about it. Poor devil. Go on, said Bill. Well, then we had the inquest, and of course I noticed, and I suppose you did too, the curious fact that Robert had asked his way at the second lodge and not at the first. So I talked to Amos and Parsons. That made it more curious. Amos told me that Robert had gone out of his way to speak to him, had called to him, in fact. Parsons told me that his wife was out in their little garden at the first lodge all the afternoon, and was certain that Robert had never come past it. He also told me that Cayley had put him on to a job on the front lawn that afternoon. So I had another guess. Robert had used the secret passage, the passage which comes out into the park between the first and second lodges. Robert, then, had been in the house. It was a put-up job between Robert and Cayley. But how could Robert be there without Mark knowing? Obviously, Mark knew too. What did it all mean? When was this? Interrupted Bill. Just after the inquest. After you'd seen Amos and Parsons, of course. Yes. I got up and left them, and came to look for you. I got back to the clothes then. Why did Mark change his clothes so secretly? Disguise? But then what about his face? That was much more important than clothes. His face, his beard, he'd have to shave off his beard. And then, oh, idiot. I saw you looking at that poster. Mark. Acting. Mark made up. Mark disguised. Oh, priceless idiot. Mark was Robert. Matches, please. Bill passed over the matches again, waited till Anthony had relit his pipe, and then held out his hand for them, just as they were going into the other's pocket. Yes, said Bill thoughtfully. Yes. But wait a moment. What about the plow and horses? Anthony looked comically at him. You'll never forgive me, Bill, he said. You'll never come clue hunting with me again. What do you mean? Anthony sighed. It was a fake, Watson. I wanted you out of the way. I wanted to be alone. I guessed at my ex, and I wanted to test it every way by everything we discovered. I simply had to be alone just then. So he smiled and added, well, I knew you wanted a drink. You are a devil, said Bill, staring at him. And your interest when I told you that a woman had been staying there, well, it was only polite to be interested when you'd taken so much trouble. You brute. You Sherlock. And then you keep trying to steal my matches. Well, go on. That's all. My ex fitted. Did you guess Miss Norris and all that? Well, not quite. I didn't realize that Cayley had worked for it from the beginning, had put Miss Norris up to frightening Mark. I thought he'd just seize the opportunity. Bill was silent for a long time. Then, puffing at his pipe, he said slowly, has Cayley shot himself? Anthony shrugged his shoulders. Poor devil, said Bill. It was decent of you to give him a chance. I'm glad you did. I couldn't help liking Cayley in a kind of way, you know. He's a clever devil. If you hadn't turned up just when you did, he would never have been found out. I wonder. It was ingenious, but it's often the ingenious thing which gets found out. The awkward thing from Cayley's point of view was that, though Mark was missing, neither he nor his body could ever be found. Well, that doesn't often happen with a missing man. He generally gets discovered. In the end, a professional criminal, perhaps not, but an amateur like Mark. He might have kept the secret of how he killed Mark, but I think it would have become obvious sooner or later that he had killed him. Yes, there's something in that. Oh, just tell me one thing. Why did Mark tell Miss Norbury about his imaginary brother? That's puzzled me rather, too, Bill. It may be that he was just doing the Othello business, painting himself black all over. I mean, he may have been so full of his appearance as Robert that he had almost got to believe in Robert and had to tell everybody. More likely, though, he felt that, having told all of you at the house, he had better tell Miss Norbury, in case she met one of you. In which case, if you mentioned the approaching arrival of Robert, she might say, oh, I'm certain he has no brother. He would have told me if he had, and so spoil his joke. Possibly, too, Cayley put him onto it. Cayley obviously wanted as many people as possible to know. About Robert. Are you going to tell the police? Yes, I suppose they'll have to know. Cayley may have left another confession. I hope he won't give me away. You see, I've been a sort of accessory since yesterday evening, and I must go and see Miss Norbury. I asked, explained Bill, because I was wondering what I should say to Betty. Miss Calladine. You see, she's bound to ask. Perhaps you won't see her again for a long time, said Anthony sadly. As a matter of fact, I happen to know that she will be at the Barringtons, and I go up there tomorrow. Well, you had better tell her. You're obviously longing to. Only don't let her say anything for a day or two. I'll write to you. Righto. Anthony knocked the ashes out of his pipe and got up. The Barringtons, he said. Large party. Fairly, I think. Anthony smiled at his friend. Yes. Well, if any of them should happen to be murdered, you might send for me. I'm just getting into the swing of it. Thank you for listening to the story. Tell us in the comments how you liked it and which story you want to hear next. See you in the next one.